I'm going to play this content right now, and I'm going to give you context. Stay with me for a couple of minutes.
Fight. This is why, Hezbollah has said, as long as what Israel doesn't cross the line of tolerance, we'll stay out of this fight. And Hamas has told everybody, we got this under control, guys. We don't need you. We got this under control. And they do. They're in total control of the situation. It's callously, they don't care about the people upstairs, or they do, but they're like Charles de Gaulle, they're willing to sacrifice them for the greater good. If you ask the majority of Palestinians if you could die, give your life for the birth of a Palestinian nation, they would say yes, because for 75 years, that's all they dreamed of. And now, thanks to Hamas, they have that possibility. Hezbollah does not want to be a part of the fight. Iran does not want to be a part of this fight. Again, Iran has met with the Hamas political leadership in Qatar, and we're told the same thing. We don't want you to intervene. We got this under control. What's that tell you? When the Israelis say, we know that Iran gave the green light. Iran knew nothing about this. This took Iran totally by surprise, just like Hezbollah were taken by surprise. And Iran is just saying, hey guys, we just normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. Big deal. I mean, it's a huge deal. We are,
by the way, it was negotiated by China.
By China.
Yeah.
We are now joining BRICS. Right. We're a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Our focus is economic. We are focusing on getting the economy of Iran, which has been suffering under sanctions for decades, on its feet, moving forward. The last thing Iran needs is a war. And they don't want a war. They want to avoid a war. And they have communicated this to the United States, which is another reason why the United States is telling Israel, you're not going into Gaza, guys, because nobody wants this war. You're going to lose the war. You can't win. And if you go in, you risk turning this into a regional war that nobody wants. Now, we know, if you've read Barbara Tuchman's book, The Guns of August, we know that in World War I, in the summer of 1914, nobody wanted a world war, but everybody slow walked their way to it because it was just one of these things, like a slow-moving traffic accident that you know is going to be horrible, and you're watching it, and you're not doing anything to stop it because it's inevitable. We could be on that path. Hopefully, we're not. Hopefully, the United States has communicated appropriately, not only with Israel, but with Hezbollah and with Iran, that we want to avoid escalation. This is why, if you noticed last night, there was a massive attack against American bases in Syria and Iraq by so-called Shia resistance forces. 24 Americans, according to the news, were wounded, soldiers. One contractor died of a heart attack. Now, normally, this would be the kind of thing that would precipitate massive American counterstrike. But have you seen American bombers in the air dropping bombs? No. Why? Because this is called escalation management. This is where we are going to absorb a certain amount of punishment as sort of like a safety valve. You want to bleed off this pressure, bleed it off. But what you have to ensure when you bleed off the pressure, you're not doing anything to generate more pressure. Again, let me just make this point. For the first time in a long time, there is a chance for real peace in the Middle East, because you could never talk about genuine peace in the Middle East if it didn't include a legitimate Palestinian state. Thanks to Hamas, thanks to what Hamas did, that option is now on the table, and there's recognition by everybody that there will be no going forward, no return to the status quo without a Palestinian state being created. This is bad news for Israel, but it's good news for Israel. Israel wants security. There will never be security without a Palestinian state, because there will always be conflict. There will always be a war. Israel somehow believes that they can make this problem go away. They haven't. The only way this problem goes away is what we talked about earlier. You create a legitimate Palestinian state. You allow the Palestinian people now to have hope based upon their own hard work to create their own nation. And you instantly delegitimize the kind of violence that Hamas is promoting. You will compel Hamas to become a political entity dedicated to the growth and prosperity of a Palestinian state, or else they will be thrust into the trash bin of history by the Palestinian people.
So enough about that. The reason why I wanted to play that was because obviously the Middle East in this particular time frame, in the current moment of time, is a bit of in some hostile waters, obviously because of what's going on with Israel and Hamas, and the fact that you have Saudi Arabia trying to play somewhat of a peacemaker of some sort, meaning that they are trying to, I guess, legitimize themselves as the negotiators of the entire region, and rightfully so, because if you are the ruler of Saudi Arabia, guess what? What is your nickname to the Muslim world? What? The custodian of the holy mosques, the two holy mosques, one in Medina and one in Mecca, so on and so forth. So what we have going on with Saudi Arabia right now is a situation where they understand how to negotiate. In other words, you look at the UFC, that's a great example of that. And you're probably wondering, how am I using the UFC and a UFC content related video to somehow talk about this conflict? Well, in some ways, a lot of it is relatively related, and a lot of it, well, not so much. Part of the reason why it's relatively related is because of the fact that if you don't have certain peace in the Middle East, and especially in Saudi Arabia, guess what? You're not going to have any of these sporting events that you want going on, because the entire region is going to be up in smoke. So in relation to what's going on with Hamas and its leadership, and not only that, the people that are trying to negotiate with them, such as other countries that are involved, Iran, you have Qatar, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Bahrain, you have all these people that are in neighboring that are in that neighboring regions of the Middle East, and that also includes Egypt, because guess what? Egypt is also on the verge of hosting themselves their own UFC fight nights, or perhaps maybe a pay-per-view. Saudis for sure are going to host a pay-per-view somewhere in March time, and they're going to try to do it before that big April card of UFC 300, which will more than likely probably take place in Vegas. But before that, they want to fill in a certain number of international cards they have going on. Traditionally, the UFC would have shows in March that would involve, let's say, London or maybe even Paris or something to that extent. Well, you can't have any of those if the entire region is on fire, right? So it's very important to talk about these things. But also, you got to understand a couple of things about this particular subject with Saudi Arabia. You know that the UAE is in business with the UFC, yet the UAE doesn't mind that Saudi Arabia is doing business with the UFC as well somewhere down the road, after they just had this big boxing match with Francis Ngannou, which, by the way, really ties in to this whole entire story. Now, why is that? For one, not to mention the fact that Francis Ngannou had this great opportunity of a lifetime, and having to do it without the UFC, and then not having to pay them a certain amount of money just so they can co-host or co-promote the entire promotion. I mean, it was an absolute slam dunk in his particular side of the fence. So we now know that Francis Ngannou won. John Jones, he somewhat won because of the fact that now that Francis left, it became a much easier matchup for John Jones to get in there and win the heavyweight championship, which, by the way, is his second weight class undisputed championship that he won in the UFC. So the problem now is that, let's just be honest, we can't consider him the lineal champion of the world when it comes to the undisputed UFC championship, because Francis left with bad terms of, well, being stripped of the title and not having the title in his hand, in terms of saying, well, you know what? I am now the world champion, and I'm going to box the lineal world champion of the other sport. Instead, what he has going on is a situation where there's going to be a lot of questions. Who really is the baddest man in the world? And the problem is, you can't answer that question if you have John Jones in the UFC and then you have Francis Ngannou in the PFL while doing all these big boxing matches that are now available to him. So what is the solution here? Just like the beginning of the audio and everything that I had just mentioned, and everything that the audio had just mentioned, by the way, shout outs to Scott Ritter, who was a former UN weapons inspector and a former United States Marine officer at that. So try to put in perspective that the Saudis are going to try to negotiate the fight between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou, along with the UFC. Now, what are some problems and issues with that? Well, just like with Israel's dilemma, and just like with Israel's ultimatum of certain subjects that, well, let's say, we're not going to do this. If you don't do this, we're not going to allow a Palestinian state because it's within our policy to not allow that. Who does this sound like? It sounds a lot like, well, the UFC. Because guess what? They're not going to co-promote with a guy like Jon Jones, who, by the way, is the lineal champion of the world. But what happens if he loses to a guy like Francis who's not in contract? You know what that's going to look like? Well, if you guys are fans of professional wrestling, you remembered what happened with CM Punk, right? The guy took on John Cena somewhere in 2011 or so. And, well, it was literally a do-or-die matchup. He was either going to win the championship or leave the WWE empty-handed. Lo and behold, he beats John Cena in the summer of 2011, becomes the undisputed WWE champion, and guess what? Rides off into the sunset with their belt. Now, obviously, this is a fictional world, not really in terms of the real MMA world and its contract negotiations and what they would allow and not allow, and especially on the subject of co-promotion, which is going to be a big no-no and a deal breaker for the UFC. So who comes in to try and negotiate this whole entire situation? Well, just like China. China came in there and negotiated with Iran and Saudi Arabia. And now it is Saudi Arabia's turn to go in there and, well, they need to go in there and negotiate with Francis Ngannou and Jon Jones and get this fight together. Because guess what? Everybody wants to see this fight. And the Saudis can afford to pay everybody. Now, irregardless of the fact that, well, maybe Francis Ngannou should have waited or this and that, you don't know that because you don't know that the UFC was going to do a deal with Saudi somewhere down the road when all this man is thinking about is his current negotiations that he has going on within having to expire his contract after one fight. So that's something you have to take into serious consideration. Well, the Saudis, you also have to take into consideration, have insurmountable amounts of wealth, meaning that they can afford to literally do whatever they want, and that involves sporting events and geopolitical decisions and power moves. This is something you can never deny from the Saudis. Now, are they going to try and do the same thing with the UFC? Perhaps, because guess what? It couldn't be a better time to do it. Just like what that gentleman said earlier in the audio, Scott Ritter. He said that there isn't a better time to create peace in the Middle East than now, which, by the way, sounds very positive, considering that the way that the world looks at this conflict seems like it's going to be an open door for World War III of some sort. But the reality is that in business, it's not really conducive for you to make enemies because it's not going to do any good for your bottom line. It's not going to do any good for the money that you're trying to obtain and the gains that you're trying to maneuver within these business deals. It's just not helpful to make enemies, which is why Iran decided to take the decisions that they made. And it's the reason why they vehemently deny funding Hamas in any kind of way, because you know what? They're not trying to create instability in the region, at least according to that gentleman. So it's important to know this. With the Saudis, they do this on a geopolitical global scale. Why can't they do this in the world of professional fighting? So this is something you definitely got to look out for, which is why I'm titling this particular video something to the extent of Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. The Saudis need to make it happen. And then on the parentheses, geopolitical implications of the Middle East. So quite a great title that I just came up with. I'm probably going to have to rewatch this before I go and re-upload it so I could remember the title. But nonetheless, it's a great title and it's highly appropriate for this particular subject at hand. Now, what are some issues and what are some pros and cons in making this happen? Well, for one, let's talk about why the UFC would actually consider it. Okay, for one, you got to take into consideration this is Jon Jones's last time of ever, let's say, perhaps maybe fighting. There was a rumor that he was going to fight Stipe and then just ride off into the sunset. Maybe fight Tom Aspinall or perhaps maybe Sergey, and then that would be it. He would ride off into the sunset, nothing more, nothing less, and retire undefeated, 2 world championships under his belt, and that'll be that. Well, the issue is that that's not an issue at all if you're the UFC. Because let's say if he wins the fight against Francis Ngannou, well, you have to vacate the belt anyway and then have another interim championship, or maybe perhaps they're going to crown a future champion in this interim fight at UFC 285 with Sergey versus Tom Aspinall. Maybe that's what they're going to do. Eventually, they're going to do that. If Francis ends up leaving as the world champion, again, it's not like it's the first time that that's ever happened. So it's not going to change the ethos and the trajectory of your entire company and what it is that you stand for exactly. It's just everything's going to be left intact, and you're going to crown a new champion anyway. So why not do a super fight like this? On top of that, the Saudis can facilitate it. They can pay everybody the money that they need. And guess what? They're not worried about return investments, which is the reason why in recent times you've seen Chael Sonnen and Ariel Helwani argue in their little heated debate that they had at the MMA Hour just days after the Francis Ngannou and the Tyson Fury fight. And what was the fight about? Well, Chael's case was that, well, the Saudis made zero return in this. Guess what? Ariel Helwani's case, which, by the way, I sort of agree with him on, that's not what it's about with the Saudis. They're not trying to beat Floyd Mayweather's pay-per-view records or Conor McGregor's pay-per-view records or Brock Lesnar's or any pay-per-view star out there. They're not trying to do any of that. If they can, great. If they don't, it's not a big deal because guess what? Their number one goal out of this whole entire thing is to create sports tourism for their kingdom, which is not a bad idea. So guess what? That's what's going on. That's what's going to happen. And the Saudis are going to try to somehow negotiate themselves into getting this Francis Ngannou, Jon Jones fight in the octagon. Now, the problem is it going to be with the PFL or the UFC? Well, I could see a situation where they build up, let's say, a PFL versus UFC card, or maybe have guys that are a combination of PFL and UFC fighters mix and match together, maybe a UFC fight, and then maybe a PFL fight, and then maybe a fight between a UFC fighter and a PFL fighter and somewhere in between, or maybe have one of these weird undercards where, let's say, some guys fight for a contract. Maybe they have an Ultimate Fighter prior to that matchup, PFL versus the UFC, with ESPN hosting it. And why not? The ESPN is already the distributor of PFL and the UFC at the same time, on top of all the other big boxing matches out there, including Queensberry Queensberry Promotions with Frank Warren and Tyson Fury, which, by the way, was the host of the Francis Ngannou and Tyson Fury fight. So these are the things that we really got to look out for when it comes to making this Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou fight. It's a mountain to climb. It seems impossible because of the past occurrences that the UFC has done in terms of their practices, in terms of not allowing co-promotions, in terms of being limited to the type of sponsorships that you walk into the cage with. So all of these things have to be taken into factors when you try to understand negotiating in this type of business matter and in this type of business endeavors and the people that are involved in it, just like with Middle Eastern politics, as mentioned. But either way, the way that everything sounds and the way that this is going to work out, it seems very positive for not only the region of the Middle East to somehow have a chance of peace and a blueprint that can be, let's say, followed in a reasonable manner to make ends meet in these questions that, let's say, both parties or all the parties involved want answered. But then also, it's a positive time for combat sports being able to make the fights that you want, irregardless of pay-per-views, irregardless of who is the A side, who is the B side. Is this going to cost much? Are we going to have the right investment returns? Because let's face it, the majority of why fights are not made is because of the fact that the money just isn't right. And not only is the money not right, it's within a situation that a lot of companies are not willing to invest because they just don't have the means to lose money in $100 million range the way that the Saudis can. But for the Saudis, it's a much bigger reason why they are doing these sporting events. And you can say that it's because they want to make the fans happy around the world. You could say that maybe because they are boxing and mixed martial arts fight fans themselves and other sporting fans in other disciplines that they want to host. But either way, it's a great time for combat sports for all these fights to be made without any reservations from anybody and without any gains or losses having to be worried about. So, guys, like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. If you would like to see a John Jones versus Francis Ngannou fight, and at what capacity are we going to get that? Are we going to get it at a PFL cage? Are we going to get it at a UFC cage? More than likely, I'm going to go with the latter, perhaps the UFC cage, because guess what? The Saudis, they can literally open up their own MMA league. You know who else can literally open up their own MMA league? Elon Musk. He can also open up his own MMA league. But the problem is they don't have the lineage, they don't have the longevity of having fans trust them, and they don't have the roster. The UFC already has that, and this is the reason why the UFC and Saudi Arabia decided to do business straight away, just right after they were doing business with the Emiratis. So, like and subscribe. Inshallah, we can see this fight somewhere down the road because, let's be honest, it's the only fight that fans really want to see out of these two. Most people don't even really want to see Stipe versus John. Stipe was just there because he was the next best thing. And now that John is injured, Stipe wanted no parts of this fight because John Jones was the name that he had in mind, and he's not about to go in there with some young killers like Tom Aspinall and Sergey, who have a name but don't have the greatest value. So, inshallah, they make this fight, and inshallah, you will like and subscribe. All right, so we are live. I'm going to put a timestamp right here of when exactly I'm going to talk about Tyan Booth and the little online altercation that we have. I don't know if I would classify it as a beef. I got to be honest with you guys. In order for anything to be sort of considered a beef, you would have to sort of live within close proximity to these particular people. Now, usually beef is predicated on the idea that, hey, you know what? We have a problem. We live in the same neighborhood or within the circumference of each other. Obviously, this is not that. This is more like an online disagreement and really just a battle of ideas. No different than the same type of online spat I had gotten on with that other conservative online host. You guys know who I'm talking about, the Don't Unfriend Me show. This is a little bit different. So before I go into this, and I'm going to show you the little interaction that me and Tyan Booth had, I'm going to talk to you about sort of his background a little bit, right? So as you know, Tyan Booth is a British boxer, right? To each its own, what you would consider an accomplished career or a non-accomplished career. It's not so much about that. This isn't really what this whole thing is sort of about. What it is that he is now an online personality based on the fact that he got done with boxing, found a new, different avenue, and really has a background in speaking with people. And not only that, doing interviews, as you may have known him to have been part of the IFL Kugan Cassius shows, right? Which he had interviewed fighters. And part of that, by the way, leads to some of his known online conflicts that he's had with the likes of Kugan Cassius. Very well documented, as you know. Now, again, this is not about a good guy versus bad guy narrative. Even if it's myself, even if it's involving me, I'm not here to portray myself as the good guy, and anybody that I have a disagreement with or a serious beef with is somehow the bad guy. This isn't that. I'm going to give you the true to God, honest, objective truth, even if it's detrimental to my own reputation, because the truth can never be considered disrespectful, as they once said. So here's a couple of truths about Tyan Booth. He's been known to create Nunsgate. And for those of you that are in the United States that don't know what that is, you don't even know what nunce is. Let's just be honest about this, right? The nunce is a word describing somebody that's a pedo. Okay, so he's been accused of this. And why? Well, with the beef that he had with Kugan Cassius, he went after his daughter. And I'm not even going to mention what he said because it's so disgusting and vile. And by the way, this is a difference between me and Tyan Booth. Obviously, Tyan Booth uses a certain level of degeneracy to promote his brand. If you go on his live streams, what does the guy do? He goes and talks to prostitutes. He goes and talks to random people on these dating apps in which he engages these weird conversations. And this is something that he finds entertaining. So now let's go back to some of the things that he said. Okay, because this is what I said on my social media site right here, right? So I said, this boxer from England named Tyan Booth said he unfriended me because I have what he calls black negativity behavior. Well, this is what I said, right? Let me tell you what is negative behavior. Having to drink every live stream you do because you're socially awkward, and most of you only have a personality when you drink. You see, me, I'm turned up without having to use drugs or alcohol. That means I lead a more positive life than most of you who need alcohol and drugs in order for you to turn up your personalities. The only thing positive most of you will experience is being HIV magic style positive, where all the tricking some of y'all do. And this is well documented. Tyan Booth has been arrested by his local police force for, guess what? Doing exactly that, tricking around Nottingham, England, or I'm sorry, Sheffield, wherever it is that he lives at. So I obviously wrote there with a little bit of some plug to my channel, like and subscribe on my channel and whatnot, just like I'm telling you right now to like and subscribe. So, okay, let's, we'll read the other comments that other people said, but let's focus on Tyan Booth. So he said, and this is what I take offense to, right? Not really the biggest offense there is, but well worth noting. He said, I didn't unfriend you because you have black negative behavior. I unfriended you because you kept tagging me in your boring YouTube posts. So in other words, he says that I'm boring. Okay. To each its own. That's a subjective language, right? I don't delve into these subjective languages that people can't measure. Now, if you want to measure certain metrics of, let's say, I don't know, what you have in your bank account or what you have going on or your net worth or this and that, or the type of properties that you have, let's just be honest, right? Are we really going to go there? And by the way, Tyan Booth, I'm not one of these other guys that you have on your chats that have nothing going on with their lives, right? Like, I will literally battle you on every front and every metric that you want to be measured in terms of who's doing what. So this is what I wrote in response to him. No lie, Ty, I watch your show. Not because you're the best talker. Clearly you're not. Definitely not better than me. And that's just being honest. That's not me being cocky. My rise in the next coming years will eventually overlap you to prove that. I watch your show because you've trained with some of the best boxers, or one of my favorite boxers in the world, which, by the way, is Prince Nassim, one of the greatest of all time, at least in my opinion. Obviously, that's not going to be the opinion of most boxing aficionados, but you sort of know where the intrigue for Tyan Booth comes from. He obviously comes from that gym and lineage, and this is the reason why he has that type of following. So I told him that is truly your only appeal, and you also know that. I also wrote, after the Tyson Fury and Usyk fight, I saw the brilliant breakdown that Tyan Booth did. Now, if he wasn't such a drug addict, alcoholic, you could literally be the Dan Hardy of boxing. Okay. And who's Dan Hardy? For those boxing heads that are watching this and don't know, he's a former UFC UK #1 contender at 170, fought George St. Pierre, and now has one of the most brilliant minds in YouTube MMA, if not one of the most brilliant minds in MMA coaching, period. So that's for another topic with Dan Hardy, but the focus today is Tyan Booth. However, your main appeal, you wish, is to put on degeneracy, and this is the truth about Tyan Booth. But hey, to each its own. I'm only stating facts in what you perceive as boring versus entertainment. And again, that's just the reality of it, guys. Everybody has their own subjective taste to certain things. Oh, let me go back and read the comments that other people had said here as well, which I think is sort of important to get on right here. So, okay, so Zane Musa Boxing right here obviously has my back, right? That's a given. That's one of your homies. They're going to give you, they're going to have your back regardless. Okay. He says, you're a good man, bro. F the haters. And then I wrote back, to each its own, right? Some people will not understand each other, and it's okay. He says, do your thing, bro. Look, that's the thing, right? You guys got to understand, not everybody is going to understand everybody. And quite frankly, Tyan Booth just has a low IQ, to be really quite frank about it. Now, look, is he smart? Is he socially intelligent? Yeah, 100%. If you want to talk about that, a certain skill that Tyan Booth has, the guy is socially intelligent. So not only is it because of the fact that he has a following due to these famous names that he's trained with, which, by the way, is really a big factor that you want to use if you want to get on YouTube or MMA content space or anything like that. This is also the reason why I talk about, let's say, my experience with training with Urijah Faber and Team Alpha Male Gym, and then meeting some of a little bit more well-known fighters to the hardcore space, right? Of course, we're going to use that. But other than that, the other appeal that he uses is the most low-hanging fruit of all, which is just get drunk and then turn up. That's what he does. And I'm going to delve a little bit into Tyan Booth's personality, okay? Because I think it's important to sort of understand his mindset and where exactly that he came from. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to talk about, we're also going to talk about Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. Let's not forget about that. This whole entire page is about MMA. It's not always about the conflicts that people go through online or the conflicts that I go through online. We are also a hardcore fan base page, and we're going to talk about fights as we talk about the drama, the news, and everything in between, and the business side of things, right? But for now, we will also talk about Tyan Booth. That's the main topic of this particular subject. Just to mention a couple of fights that had happened this past weekend. If you're watching this right now, live, obviously, it is Sunday, the 26th of May, 2024. And yesterday, the 25th, you had a bare knuckle card. You had Paige Van Zant in her boxing debut. I don't know if that was a pro debut or that was a white collar boxing debut. But nonetheless, that was a draw. And yesterday, you also had the anticipated rematch of Jack Catterall and Josh Taylor, which, by the way, surprised me. Josh Taylor looked way less of himself here than he did in the previous fight. And it was a very close fight, split decision, but this time it went to Jack Catterall, and perhaps maybe a bit of some justice that had gone along with that particular matchup, right? Because obviously the first fight was very controversial, but nonetheless, that's what you had gotten. Now, back to the subject at hand with Tyan Booth. So as I mentioned, right, what are some intrigues that I've really took into with Tyan Booth when I started watching his YouTube show? Obviously, a big part of it was that he trained with Prince Nassim. He always mentions Dom Ingle, his coach right here, and some of the wisdom and knowledge that he's given him over the years. Now, here's some things that I remember that Tyan Booth had talked about when it came to the knowledge that Dom Ingle had given him. And I'm talking street knowledge, right? Which, by the way, I think is one of the main reasons why I think Tyan Booth is really socially intelligent, but when it comes to problem solving skills or conscientious aspects of life, this is just not something that he's going to talk about. He's not a spiritual guy. He's not a guy that has deep conscious thoughts, although sometimes he does. And a part of that is sort of drug-induced motivation based on trying to further better his content. Now, it's not to say that he's a terrible talker overall. What I am saying is that he's just a little bit slow when he starts. Now, let's just be honest. You go on his live stream, what happens? This is what you get. Hey, guys, how you doing? A whole lot of silence, a whole lot of silence, and a whole lot of silence. Just like this kind of silence. And then out of nowhere, he goes on his dating app, talks to a bunch of random women that he puts on live stream. On top of that, then he calls a whole bunch of prostitutes. And then he goes and talks about people's sexual value and lack of value and this and that. And then tries to sort of emulate Andrew Tate's rhetoric. Which, by the way, I'm going to be honest with you, right? Before I even knew who Andrew Tate was, all these things about men's rights or standing on masculinity and things of that nature, I've heard Tyan Booth actually talk about this before Andrew Tate. However, what is important to understand about that is, quite frankly, it's not an idea that he had made up. You understand? It's not an idea that he created. But it's an idea that a lot of people will claim, hey, I was the first guy to have came up with this idea. I was the guy to have done this or this and that. The reality is that anytime we use something that works for us, guess what we do? We act like we are the originators of it. Just like what I'm doing right now, how I'm doing this particular content. What am I doing? Obviously, I'm doing an audio right now. Sometimes I get on video. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm in my car. Sometimes I'm in my studio or office, or sometimes I'm in my backyard. I have different ways of doing it. But right now, I'm doing an audio with visual pictures. Now, I'll give it up and really admit where I got this particular concept from, which I thought was a neat idea. It's from the Weasel. And not only the Weasel, I also got it from Tyan Booth himself, because he's done videos of Chris Eubank. He's done videos of Terrence Crawford dissing his wife. He's done videos of Michelle Joy Phelps, who is also a boxing commentator / YouTuber that he somehow had problems with for whatever reason that he has. So there's a lot of different things that I've learned from him from a production side. But make no mistake about it, we come from two totally different spectrums of entertainment, or what he finds entertainment, right? For me, obviously being a Muslim, there's just certain things that I'm not going to do. And guess what? Tyan Booth has also mentioned something to the effect that, hey guys, if I became a Muslim, I would probably lose a lot of followers, right? And by the way, this is a question that I asked him on his live stream that he did a few years ago, not even a few years ago, just maybe within a span of last year that he was doing. And why did I ask him this? Because I thought that, you know what, you being from England, being that it's a big Muslim population, being that a lot of the fighters and people that you grew up admiring were Muslims, and a lot of your friends were Muslims, I figured, you know what, it's an interesting question to ask. But I didn't expect that he would say he would lose a lot of fans if he became a Muslim. Now, obviously, Andrew Tate became a Muslim. Did he lose fans by the result of it? No. One would argue that he probably gained a whole different wide range of audience that he may have never had before, or wasn't part of his original fan base. Same thing with other athletes like Gervonta Davis. Did it make him a lot more popular in terms of being Muslim or in being a Muslim convert? Possibly, because one can't argue that obviously when you join a certain group or a certain religion, the people of that religion are going to be intrigued by it, and naturally so. But the reason why I think that Tyan Booth really doesn't have a chance of converting. And by the way, this is not a knock on anybody. I'm sure a lot of people that are going to be listening to my content. I'm sure they're not Muslims, nor will they ever be, but there's a good percentage of them that are. But I will say, just for commentary's sake, why Tyan Booth will never become a Muslim is, I'm just going to say it like this. The man is a quitter, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why. Okay, obviously, here's a visual that I didn't mean to put up, but this is Kugan Cassius, one of the people that he's had beef with over the years. We're going to talk more about him and how this relates, but obviously he went so far as to dig at him in a low-hanging fruit, okay, which is what? His daughter. Now, again, you got to look up exactly what Tyan Booth said about Kugan Cassius's daughter, but I will say that it is within the borderlines, or not even the borderlines, even just crossing over illegally into illegal matters that is literally classified to be pedo. Okay, and that is a reason why he went through the whole Nunsky thing. I urge you guys to take a look at that. But another thing that I had noticed about with his contentious relationship with Kugan Cassius is that he constantly tries to berate Kugan Cassius in a racially derogatory manner. Okay, this is the reality of Tyan Booth. I mean, the guy is absolutely, I'm not going to say racist, okay? I don't think that's the right term to use, because anybody can say racist things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are racist. And that's very important to understand the distinction. But the way Tyan Booth goes after Kugan Cassius, I will say it is racist, because he goes after the fact that he is Sri Lankan or East Indian or Asian or something to that effect. And then every time, and get this, this is where the weakness of the mind really comes in my humble opinion, and I'm sure there's people out there that are going to agree with me on this. If you are a racist, you are the scum of the earth. Now, why? Because you have to literally delve into something that what people can't control by birth as some kind of low-hanging fruit argument to whatever frustration you have to let out. And that's literally what Tyan Booth does to Kugan Cassius. He constantly digs at him being Indian or being Sri Lankan. This is a mind of a weak person. And again, part of the storylines that I had mentioned on the titles here was New Jersey street fights. And let me tell you, you guys know that I'm a West Coast dude. I've been living in California for a long time. But for those of you that don't know, I was raised in New Jersey, went to high school, middle school, and elementary school there. And I got to tell you, every time there were scraps that were going on, a racially derogatory term had to constantly be thrown at any sides of the matter, whether it was from the black kids, the Italian kids, the Puerto Ricans, the whites, of any kind, the Asians. There was always a racially derogatory term. And quite frankly, many of this is just low-hanging fruit and just low-level intelligence, low emotional intelligence at that. Because remember, I had just mentioned to you earlier in the stream that Tyan Booth has great social intelligence. What he doesn't have is great emotional intelligence, nor does he have great problem-solving intelligence, nor does he have any subconscious thought to ponder upon the realities of the world. It's just not the kind of guy that he is. So another example, I remember he got on the phone with somebody on his live stream. I believe it, and remember, a lot of the live streams that Tyan Booth has done, he's erased for whatever reason, right? And maybe it has something to do with one live stream he did where I believe an Indian kid came on, started cussing him out. And then out of nowhere, his first response out of his own weak emotional intelligence was to say something to the effect of, "Oh man, I'm going to say something racist to you. I'm going to say something racist." Obviously, a bit of a failed attempt for me to make a Sheffield accent. But obviously, Tyan Booth talks a little bit deeper than that. And then he said, I'm going to say something racist to you. And this is the first thing that he says, which indicates to me that he has, unfortunately, a quitter's mentality. You guys know this. He has a quitter's mentality. Okay, let me play you a video that I did about him a few months ago when he walked out of one of his fights that he did. Right, this is very important to take a look at. I'm going to play this for you guys right here. So I'm sure you guys know about Tyan Booth, like literally walking out of the ring in the middle of his fight. Well, now, currently, he's doing a live right now, right? Just pretty much trying to explain what his reason was. And a lot of it had to deal with an injury. According to him, he says that while somebody was holding pads for him, you know, when someone throws a little fake jab at you to kind of keep you aware while they're holding pads for you, well, he did that. And apparently he took one to the eye, and it sort of affected him in a way where it made him feel insecure going into the fight. And then he also kind of talks about how he went in there and did a few little knees on the clinch positions, little short punches to kind of play a little bit dirty. But one thing that he said was that over the years, he's done nothing but drinking and smoking, and he didn't feel like he was just really ready for this particular fight. And there was a little bit of a quitter in him that decided, you know what, this is not worth it. But also, you can look at it at that, or you can look at it in a different way where, like, maybe he just wanted to get out of there because of his safety. On top of that, he was already obligated to do this particular fight, and he couldn't back out. You had all these people do all these, I don't know, hotel reservations wherever that fight was taking place. It looked like it was taking place in like some random bingo hall or some small time casino somewhere in like central England or something like that. But nonetheless, that's his reason. That's the reason why he decided he wanted to walk out of the ring. And I just thought I'd share that with you as soon as he basically came into the world and revealing all of that. Now, it sounds like an excuse. At the same time, it sounds like a reasonable thing. Let me know what you think. Just comment down below, like and subscribe. This is a short one, but there's nothing more to really say to it. Probably more so in the near future. But for now, inshallah, like and subscribe. All right. Well, let me play to you again that particular video, okay? Because what I'm about to talk about, what is this? Damn, bad head movement. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to play this again because I'm going to talk about exactly where this goes into his character flaw. Okay, so let's play this again. I'm sure you guys know about Tyan Booth, like literally walking out of the ring in the middle of his fight. Well, now, currently, he's doing a live right now, right? Just pretty much trying to explain what his By the way, that was one of the lives that he had taken out. Literally, a lot of his lives he had taken out for whatever reason. But for those of you that have been there and saw it, you know exactly what I mean when it came to some of the other questionable stuff he's done. Here we go. Reason was, and a lot of it had to deal with an injury. According to him, he says that while somebody was holding pads for him, you know, when someone throws a little fake jab at you to kind of keep you aware while they're holding pads for you, well, he did that. And apparently he took one to the eye, and it sort of affected him in a way where it made him feel insecure going into the fight. And then he also kind of talks about how he went in there and did a few little knees on the clinch positions, little short punches to kind of play a little bit dirty. But one thing that he said was that over the years, he's done nothing but drinking and smoking, and he didn't feel like he was just really ready for this particular fight. And there was a little bit of a quitter in him that decided, you know what, this is not worth it. But also, you can look at it at that, or you can look at it in a different way where, like, Maybe he just wanted to get out of there because of his safety. On top of that, he was already obligated to do this particular fight, and he couldn't back out. You had all these people do all these, I don't know, hotel reservations wherever that fight was taking place. It looked like it was taking place in like some random bingo hall or some small time casino somewhere in like central England or something like that. But nonetheless, that's his reason. That's the reason why he decided he wanted to walk out of the ring. And I just thought I'd share that with you as soon as he basically came into the world and revealing all of that. Now, it sounds like an excuse. At the same time, it sounds like a reasonable thing. Let me know what you think. Just comment down below, like and subscribe. This is a short one, but there's nothing more to really say to it. Probably more so in the near future. But for now, inshallah, like and subscribe. Okay, sorry, I had that on mute. So I was saying, I'm definitely going to talk about how that relates to his character flaw. As you guys know, he left his daughter. Okay, now, obviously, I never wanted to make it about this, but it's a fact. He's talked about it. What I will not do, obviously, was not post a picture of his daughter or Coogan's kids or anything like that, because unfortunately, this is something that he's done, and that's just not a line I'm willing to cross. Now, with him, you got to understand, guys like this, they have no limits in what lines he will cross. Now, do I think that Tyan Booth is a genuinely nice guy? Yeah, I think there's some good in him. But here's something you got to understand. When you lead a life of degeneracy, and by the way, this is something that many of us Muslim guys constantly emphasize when it comes to leading a clean life, leading a life that is sober, leading a life that is clear-minded and not constantly drunk and messing your health up, because your personality does not get altered, okay? And not only that, it weakens your personality. How do I know this? Think about this. He walked out on his daughter, just like he walked out in the ring. Now, what are some reasons for that? Can we go into psychological reasons as to why Tyan Booth had done something like this? Yes, I'm going to delve into that. Here's something you got to understand. When you're constantly drinking and you're constantly doing drugs, and then you lead a life of degeneracy where you just constantly go out and pick up prostitutes one after another, you don't really have a limit to what you are willing to do. And as a result, the mind that you have doesn't have any limits to where you are willing to quit. Now, if you constantly train your mind from abstinence and you're constantly training your mind within discipline, and when I mean discipline, I'm talking about long-term discipline. You see, a lot of people think that just because you stay disciplined for a fight camp, that somehow you are deemed a disciplined person. But the reality is, you're not a disciplined person if you don't live it all year round, okay? And here's a reason why. Here's a good reason why you have to live this all year round and not just in your fights. Because it affects your personality. What you eat, what you consume, what you put inside you affects how you think, and really, sometimes it affects your mental strength. So the fact that he lives this kind of lifestyle, is it really any surprise to you that he quit, left the ring, just like he left his daughter? And by the way, some of the reasons that he had mentioned are quite strange and weird, okay? And here's the thing. It goes back to him saying that I'm a boring YouTuber, which is strange. Again, it's subjective, but let me explain what his own mind is telling him in terms of his own subjectivity and what he finds boring, intriguing, or entertaining. What Tyan Booth finds entertaining is just like what many of you find entertaining, which is what? Many of you find the low-hanging fruit entertainment of things entertaining. A lot of things that don't really give you a lot of thought, right? Things that you don't really have to go into long-form details. This is something you got to understand about Tyan Booth. He does not like long-term details. He doesn't like long form conversations. He can't hold a long form conversation that doesn't have a certain dopamine high, which is why I had mentioned that he is a person that goes after the low hanging fruit of things. And that is the reason why he has low emotional intelligence. That is also the reason why he doesn't have a strong subconscious thought. And again, it is the reason why he would literally leave his daughter for whatever reason. And again, maybe I'm just generalizing, or maybe I'm just speaking out of biasness because for whatever reason. But hey, look, I'm just speaking facts. And then on top of that, he has beef with one of my homies in the UK, Umar Kayani, one of the first Pakistani British guys to have made it in Bellator, right? So they got a little beef going on, and he's my homie. So maybe there's some biasness in that. And at first, I'll tell you what, when he unfriended me on Facebook, right, I thought that the reason why was because of the Omar Kayani beef, right? That could be a possibility. But again, hey, not everybody is for everybody. That is one thing that we all have to understand about this whole thing, right? We're not going to agree with everybody. We're not going to be friends with everybody. And not everybody is going to be our own taste. And that's perfectly okay. As a result of that, this is just what it is. Conflict happens naturally. Naturally, conflict is always going to arise in whatever situation you are at because people just don't agree with each other. They have a different lifestyle. He happens to believe that by living this particular lifestyle, that somehow it's conducive to being entertaining, to getting views. And if it is, great. But I tell you what, I don't want to be the guy that gets all the views because I go out and watch prostitutes or talk to people online in some tricking dating site or something to that effect, right? I don't want to be known as that guy. He is willing to accept the fact that he is that guy. And again, that's just a difference between us and people like that in terms of the believers and the non-believers. And here's another thing that I think is really important and really worth mentioning. Tyan Booth does show a certain level of respect for Muslims. I can't lie about this, right? I can't make up stuff and say, well, Tyan Booth is a bad guy. He hates Muslims or this and that. That's further from the truth. He's actually showed a lot of respect for Muslims. So as much as this is bashing him in whatever perception people may have of what they think bashing is, this is also probably one of the most objective takes that you're going to experience when I'm breaking down someone in particular, right? Which is him. Now, why? Because I'll tell you a couple of things that he said very positively about Islam. He says that if you find a Muslim woman, you know that she is going to be loyal for life because she has a certain fear in God that most of these other people don't have. And guess what? To get off the subject of Tyan for a little bit, obviously, because I don't make these videos to become the specific vocal point of the subject, nor do I make the people that I'm talking about the focal point of this subject, but rather to learn some sort of life lesson that you can get out of it, right? So again, if Tyan Booth actually believes this and knows that, hey, this is one part of Islam that we have correct, one part of Islam that we have that is beneficial for people, well, why not follow it? And I'll tell you why. Even though he knows there's some beneficiality in this particular lifestyle that we lead, he rejects it. Why? Well, I tell you what, there's a religious component to that that I think a lot of people can sort of relate to in the Muslim world. Okay, because it goes like this, right? There was a hadith that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said something to the effect of, for every good man, there is a good woman. For every bad man, there is a bad woman. So in other words, you get what you work for and you reap what you sow. Okay, but he thinks that these are great ideas, right? Tyan Booth happens to believe that these ideas are great to become a Muslim, to live that kind of life. Now, why doesn't he take it? And again, this isn't a knock on anybody that doesn't accept it. There's going to be a lot of people that are not going to accept the Islamic religion. But I can tell you, just specifically for Tyan Booth's point of view, it's because it's too hard for him. And that is the problem that this man has, is that I just don't think that he can deal with the hardships and the realities of life outside of training and boxing. And even with that, he has problems dealing with that. So I'm going to play you guys an old video that I had back 11 months ago regarding Tyan Booth. So in order to understand these two stories that we're about to talk about, you got to understand the language of low-hanging fruit. And what exactly does that mean? Well, what that means is that when you don't like somebody or hate somebody so bad, you're willing to say anything to get to them or hurt their feelings. And I think that's really what's going on here. On the one hand, you have Conor McGregor claiming that he can beat True Geordie in a fight, and then True Geordie claiming the same thing. On the other hand, and the other story that we're covering right now is Tyan Booth in a situation where he hates this guy Coogan so bad that he's willing to say anything to get under his skin. But not only get under his skin, also use some sort of content that is funny, something that is witty, something that a lot of people can find as a shock value, very similar to the likes of, let's say, Howard Stern, or people that rap like Eminem, and all these things that come to the fold of two people having a verbal argument, having a verbal beef, or having some kind of toss-up online. So the one thing that has to be understood here, first and foremost, is the language of the low-hanging fruit. And what exactly does that mean? Well, speaking of Eminem, you guys seen 8 Mile. What happened when the leaders of the free world, which was the rival rap group that Eminem was in the opposition of, what did they say about Eminem? He said that he was trailer trash. He said that he was white. He said that his mom was this, his mom was that. He dresses like a bum. That's what I mean by low-hanging fruit. They're looking at him and they're saying the most obvious thing that they can, which, by the way, is one of the things that you have to worry about when you're putting your family out there. Now, one of the most surprising things I've noticed about Tyan Booth in the recent times was that he was out there talking about his daughter, or somehow sharing his daughter to the world in ways that he's never done before. And as somebody who was a longtime listener of his, I never even knew that he had a daughter up until he went and revealed it to the world. At the same time, he kind of understood from the beginning why he didn't want to put his daughter out there. Well, you look at Kugan Cassius, the CEO of the IFL Network, which is a big boxing channel in England. What does this guy do? He goes and posts things about his family, about his daughter, only for Tyan Booth to use it as a low-hanging fruit to attack him. But in the midst of that, it made Tyan Booth look bad, because there was a connotation of some sort of, how do I say this, nunce type of joke, or a joke that basically borderlined child molestation, which, by the way, you got to understand a couple of things about this, right? Did this make Tyan Booth look good in any capacity at all? Not one bit, because any God-fearing man out there, or any man out there that has any sense of protecting children, are going to find this disgusting. But at the same time, you also got to understand a couple of things. Number one, you got to understand baseline personalities. Does Tyan Booth have what it takes in him to do these things to children in any kind of way? Well, the most plausible answer at the current moment of time is no. And why? Well, let me explain why. For one, in the society that we live in, which are laws and regulations, he hasn't yet been convicted or arrested for any of these things. As a matter of fact, it seems that the opposite seems to be true. When you watch his live streams or his podcasts that he does or whatever content he puts out there, he does a lot of sexual innuendos and concepts of, let's say, online dating, concepts of trying to talk with prostitutes, which, by the way, he's been in trouble of before because of posting it online and for the local police of his area in Sheffield, the UK, to go and look into him, which he brought upon himself. Now, you could say that a lot of that is content driven, a lot of that is for shock value. But here's something you got to understand is that, number one, the baseline of his personality just doesn't seem that way. Number two, did what he say was very tasteless and very offensive to, let's say, people that have daughters like even himself? Of course. But we have to understand the reality of entertainment and everything that is brought upon in this type of industry that we have, in terms of the fight world, in terms of podcasting, in terms of content creation. Now, a lot of people do it that way in terms of shock value, trying to get an audience's attention in any possible way that they could. Did you know Logan Paul and Jake Paul were exactly that? They were the type of guys that in their earlier days of YouTube went into a shock value system of doing the most outrageous things for views and attention. And that is a reality for a lot of people. They do find themselves in a situation where they have to garner this attention in a negative way. But at the same time, there are others, let's say like myself, who doesn't really fall into that category. And the reason why I say that is because I just don't think and believe that making a content that is outrageous or something that is not a representative of yourself is conducive to a long-term happiness and ethos as a Muslim man. However, you got to take into consideration that other people out there have an appetite for this type of entertainment. And the way that society is going right now, you have to understand that this is the type of entertainment that people want. So people are going to try to push and try to shock people in limits that they've never been shocked before. Now, you got to understand, this is how Logan Paul got canceled back in 2017 when he went and made that suicide video in Japan. Why did he do that? Well, for the same exact reason why Tyan Booth made the joke that he did. Do I like the joke that he made? Absolutely not. I absolutely hate it. Because as a God-fearing man and somebody that cares about the well-being of children, of course, I should be offended by it. The problem with that is that I understand different nuances in terms of understanding people's baseline, in terms of understanding people's true history. And what do I mean by true history? Well, I'm talking about, has Tyan Booth ever been arrested for committing nonce acts or committing acts against minors in any kind of way? And the answer on record is no. However, you have to also understand that his jokes were tasteless as they are. And why is that? Well, because guess what? We live in a society where views are predicated on the shock value of what you can bring to your content. And anything less than that, well, people are just not going to be interested. However, there is a segment of people out there that are interested in the truth, that are interested in objective conversations, people that want the news right down the middle. Yes, there are people out there in society that want that, but you also have to understand they are the minority. For the majority of people out there that are looking for content, they want quick, witty, and shocking content to try to liven up their day, to try to somehow provoke a certain serotonin in their brains or a certain feel-good mechanisms inside them, or somehow just this aspect of wanting to see other people fail or seeing other people succeed or seeing other people do great or seeing other people do really bad. This is what people want in society, is the extreme side of life. Because if you ever notice, is it not true that a lot of homeless documentaries are pretty big out there in the same kind of fashion that you would find a lot of documentaries that deal with the rich and famous as somewhat the same as compelling in that contrasting view of things. But the reality is that you got to understand, in order to understand this whole story between Tyan Booth versus Kugan Cassius and True Geordie versus Conor McGregor, is that everything is all about bravado and all about lying to people in terms of trying to create shock value and things. And then also there's the aspect of the machismo culture where you can't back down and I'm not going to let you talk bad about me. Because here's one thing that you got to understand about Tyan Booth. The guy loves to shock people, but at the same time, you also have to understand that comes with consequences. So what happened with Tyan Booth and Anthony Joshua? Well, you see in this picture right here, a very famous incident that took place with Tyan Booth was when he went to Anthony Joshua's gym, which I believe was located in Sheffield, his hometown that he currently lives in. He goes to his gym, and you know that Tyan Booth has a history of talking bad about other boxing people, such as media entities in that sport by the name of Michelle Phelps, Kugan Cassius, and of course he talks bad about other boxers, David Haye, Anthony Joshua, Gerald McLennan, always commenting and saying things about how he deserved to be blind because of his actions that he did as a fighter or during his prime when he had those dog fighting rings and his animal abuse and human rights records and that aspect that he didn't agree with. So he goes after anyone and everyone that is, I mean, you would say low-hanging fruit, but at the same time, people that sort of deserve it, right? And Anthony Joshua, what does he say about Anthony Joshua? Well, he believes that Anthony Joshua is fake. So one day, Anthony Joshua goes and tries to confront him about it. He's like, man, what's up? Why did you do this? Why did you say this about me? I want you to get out of my gym. And in Tyan Booth's account of that incident, which you see in the portrait right here in the bottom left corner of the screen, which was depicted by some artist made for his Patreon. Well, the guy basically told him to get out of the gym because he felt disrespected. And what is the concept of that? Well, Anthony Joshua is feeling a little bit machismo. He's like, man, I can't let this guy talk bad about me, even though you could say that Anthony Joshua is in a way higher level than Tyan Booth in terms of boxing, of course. Now, maybe in terms of media content, then you could say that you got to admit Tyan Booth has a certain level of following about him. Why? Because he shares the British spirit of banter, of going the extra mile, of pushing the limits to try to offend someone or to try to stir things up. And it has consequences. You have the attention of these fighters going after you. Just like True Geordie making comments about Conor McGregor looking like he's drugged up at the same time. You got to understand that a lot of these criticisms are warranted. Okay? Because you got to think, Tyan Booth and his criticism towards Anthony Joshua is within the frame of, well, you're fake. You're supposed to be this top dog gangster or whatever, but yet you act like this goody two-shoe, a poster boy for armor and someone that is very similar to GSP in his prime. Now, the problem was GSP was really like that. He really was a nice guy. He really was somebody that was great to be a role model towards. Khabib, the same thing. Anthony Joshua is not that guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. He came from the streets. He has a certain attitude about him. instead, he would rather have been promoted in the same similar fashion as Craig David, as this clean-cut guy of black British man that is clean-cut, somebody that your kids can look up to. So there's a lot of pressure to go into that. But then when you have these incidents where people like Tyan Booth or those college kids that he tried to fight, right? I mean, you got to think that right there, that's where the animalistic side of your machismo-ness comes out. And this is the reason why Conor McGregor goes and he claims that he can go and beat True Geordie. And then True Geordie says the same thing. Well, what's the truth in that? Right? Because obviously this is a mixed martial arts podcast. This is a combat sports podcast. We talk about real fighting and we talk about real situations of what will happen in fights. Well, it's not far-fetched to say that on any given night, True Geordie could potentially beat Conor McGregor in a street fight if, let's say, he goes and sucker punches him. Now, in a squared-up situation where they start on their feet and then they say, okay, go right now, I mean, anything can happen, but you got to think that perhaps Conor McGregor has some certain technical advantages in that because of the fact that he's elusive, because of the fact that he has great footwork. But here's the thing. What if all the things that True Geordie is saying about Conor McGregor is true, right? What do I mean by that? Well, what if all those things are true regarding the fact that, well, Conor McGregor is just not the same Conor McGregor anymore, right? He's not that witty. He's not that fast in terms of his twitch muscles that he can perform in the octagon. Well, True Geordie, he's 290 pounds. He's not really that much faster than Conor at that rate. And I've seen him spar in some boxing videos that he did. The guy looked like he was gassed out in maybe later rounds, or maybe even in some videos where he was hitting pads. He just didn't look like somebody that would look sharp later on as the rounds progress. But nonetheless, it's not anything that can be some sort of reality to any degree, right? Why? Well, because you got to understand, True Geordie is not a UFC fighter, and Conor McGregor is never going to fight outside of the UFC, nor will the UFC ever sanction or allow a fight like this to go on, right? But that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say that there's a lot of bravado that is involved in combat sports. And if there isn't any bravado, guess what? There's going to be a high population of people out there that are not going to watch. So you got to think, if you're a hardcore mixed martial arts fan or a hardcore boxing fan, you have to take this into account. Number one, if you're a hardcore fan, you are the minority. And if you are the casual fan, you are the guy that Eddie Hearn, Dana White, Bob Arum, Scott Coker, Chatri, the owner and the CEO of ONE FC, all these guys, their job every weekend is to get the casuals like you who have to go out every Saturday, right? You ever met those people that always have to go, oh, what you doing Friday or what you doing Saturday? You always got to go out. All these people, you got to understand, they're not fight fans. They have other interests. They want to watch the movies that come out on Friday, the movies that come out on Saturday, the shoes that are going to come out the next day on a particular day of the week, and then floss it into clubs during the weekends of the Fridays and Saturdays. Their entire job, those promoters that I just mentioned, their job is to get those people out of those situations on their weekend habits and their weekend plans and into their homes to watch the fights or to travel to the venues of the fights, book a hotel, and be part of the fight week atmosphere. That is their job. Their job is to get those people. Those are the casuals. Now, the hardcores, those are the guys that are always going to watch all the fights from the top main event championships to the, I guess, mid-tier level guys, or the guys that are just fighting regular fight nights on any given Saturday. not a particular big pay-per-view event or anything like that. But guess what? These promoters, their job is to make these big pay-per-view marquee matchups and to try to get those casuals into the seats. And guess what? None of these casuals care about British titles or American NABC titles or WBC, or the difference between the IBF or the difference between the UFC as opposed to Strikeforce and Bellator. These people, what they want is maximum violence, right? But the other portion of that are hardcore fans that are going to watch every card there is. But guess what? They're the minority. So in order to attract that majority, you got to give people what they want. And unfortunately, a lot of people nowadays, what they want is violence. What they want is quick, witty responses. What they want is controversy. All these things that are basically firing up their serotonin in their brain. That's what they want, that instant high right away, that instant fix. And if you can't provide that, the people just don't care. That's why, for me, I personally don't really care about trying to play a character or trying to impress anybody or even go on camera as often as I can or not, or whatever. None of these things I care about. What I care about is giving people the objective point of view. Now, other people may not like that, and that's okay. They want controversy. They want crazy talk. They want all of that. They want unpredictability. But guess what? That's one of the things that Tyan Booth can provide is absolute unpredictability. And fight talks as well, and the entertaining aspects of him going at fighters that he knows and the stories that he tell and the experience that he's had with some top-level guys that he's trained with and fought against. Those are the interesting aspects that I look for. And the others, guess what? They look for that degenerate British mindset that I think a lot of people are attracted to him by. For me personally, as a fan and a listener of his show, one of the things that I look forward towards about it is his stories against other fighters or people that are within the boxing business. In the same similar fashion, when I had some run-ins with Sean Strickland when he went and commented on my page and said some xenophobic comments regarding Muslims in Brazil and things of that nature, right? Like Tyan Booth has millions of those stories to tell in terms of the people that he runs across British boxing. So once again, this is all about entertainment and bravado. And anything else other than that, people just don't really care about. I mean, people are always going to tell and love the truth, but then there's people that just want to be lied to and want to be entertained and don't really care about being educated. And as long as those people are going to be around, you got to understand that all these things are going to continue to happen. All these controversial comments and these controversial contents that people make in order to try to entertain you and to try to get your attention. And for me, I'm no different in any of that. The only difference is I just want to go about it a different way. I just want to talk about fighting. I want to talk about the truth. I want to talk about things that actually happen as opposed to my own opinion on things, which I can also display. But at the same time, I enjoy being a classic journalist in terms of giving you the point of view down the middle. And then there are others that just want to do it in a very entertaining fashion of insulting people, talking bad about other people.
All right, seconds out.
But again, a lot of these things are entertainment, but also take it with a grain of salt, will you? Because this is the reality of it. You're going to think the way that you're going to think about other people, but at the same time, the truth is the truth. And the reality of our current world right now is as messed up as it is. And people just want hardcore entertainment, and sometimes entertainment that is not entertaining to others. But that's all I got for this particular segment.
All right.
So now we are back. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to play that particular video was to give you guys a higher context into everything that we wanted to explain about Tyan Booth and the situation that he has going on, right? So a couple of things that I think we really need to understand. Okay. Uh, this is a guy that we just have a different set of opinions and ideas on, right? That's perfectly okay. That is going to be normal. However, I did sort of take a little bit offense to the idea that he says my content is boring. So naturally, I'm just going to respond and give you my own subjective take to it. And here's the difference between me and other people. I'm going to give you the absolute truth in telling you, hey, this is my subjective take. But if there are certain matters, like let's say a particular news cycle that pops up and I'm going to have to talk about some facts and figures on a specific topic at hand, I'm going to tell you, hey, everything that you're going to see here is objective truth. So let's go back to the post that I had mentioned, right? Obviously, this is what I said about him for those of you that are just tapping in. This is what I had written to him, and you could pause it from this point and read it on your own right here. But I'm going to also read to you his response, just to be fair about it, right? Because and by the way, I'm going to go into some of the racial implications of the things that he says here, right? So here's another thing, right? Let's talk about what other people have said here, right? So Zane says you're a good man. F the haters. To each its own. Some people will not understand each other. It's okay. Obviously, very consistent to the narrative that I'm pushing here. I went and tagged in Omar Kiani right here, the first Pakistani British Bellator fighter who has a little bit of some online altercations with him, trying to get himself to sign up for a boxing fight, maybe even an MMA fight against Tyan Booth. And then Abraham here says he's an alcoholic. F him. And Nigel here, one of my longtime supporters and listeners, he says, well, I'm a middle-aged man, middle-aged world. I'm just a middle-aged, world-weary granddad from north of Ireland. Shout out to Northern Ireland. But in my opinion, you seem like a decent and respectful lad. Thank you, Nigel. On the interpersonal level, and your knowledge of combat sports and geopolitics is extensive. You also have a way with words and enthusiasm for MMA and boxing that is contagious. Now, you see that right there is the positivity that, let's just be honest, right? I sort of offer in terms of the enthusiasm. And then he says, Tyan Booth, meanwhile, was a decent boxer, but comes across as very mentally ill. And again, is he mentally ill? Maybe not, but hey, you have to call a spade, and what we say in the Islamic community, we judge by what is the apparent. And then Nigel continues and says, his bad attitude towards women and his alcohol and cocaine addictions are indicative of his mental instability, as well as him being an a-hole. You are a better man than him by any metric, so don't let it cost you a second thought. Very good. Don't let him grind you. And then he throws a Motorhead song right here. Okay, that's what's up. Hey, obviously one of the genres I'm into, heavy metal. It's heavy metal, Islamic nasheeds, and West Coast gangster rap. If it ain't that, I ain't rocking with it. But anyways, yeah, so shout outs to Nigel for those comments. Exactly everything that I had just said, right? And he also said, okay, well, I didn't unfriend you because you have black negative behavior. Okay, so here's the thing, right? Really interesting. This is one of the racial aspects that I want to go into with what Tyan Booth constantly loves to talk about, right? He loves to sort of, I guess, down black women to a certain degree. He says he doesn't like them. Okay, well, if that's not your preference, all right, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That you can't force anybody to have a specific preference. Okay, you're into a certain type of women or this and that. Nigel did say something in that comment that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to bring up, which is what? He says that Tyan Booth doesn't respect women. And I think I want to challenge that notion a little bit, only because, okay, here's the thing. Does he say a lot of disparaging things about women or this and that. Yes. And again, it really just is predicated on whatever sort of set of experiences that you have sort of anecdotally faced in your life. Now, obviously, the type of anecdotal experience that he has, he's going to run across a lot of birds, a lot of skanks, because guess what? Look at what I just said earlier. For every good man, there is a bad man. And for every bad man, there is a bad woman. Okay, it's very easy mathematics, and this is the way that we understand it in the Islamic world. So that is really all that we have when it comes to Tyan Booth, right? I think we've gone on long enough to talk about Tyan Booth and the issues that we have here. And again, this is not a knock on him to any degree whatsoever. This isn't to sort of start beef with him in any kind of way. I mean, look, it's like this, man. If you got a problem with somebody on the internet, the reality is you really don't have a problem with them because you don't have real life problems. So, what do I mean by that exactly? This is literally what I mean by that. Online beef is not like real life beef that you have on the streets, okay? And anybody that knows anything knows exactly what I'm talking about, okay? You know exactly what I'm talking about. When you have beef in the streets or real conflict in whatever part of the world you are in, people that talk about you online or your differences of opinion or this idea of, well, we have a problem or this, it's non-existent. Look, I'll tell you, remember that Matt Spear situation, right? With the Don't Unfriend Me show. Okay, so I'll tell you what's interesting about that. He started talking about, yeah, if you want to test your MMA on me too, then go right ahead. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I understand this is a person that is, how do I say this? I guess what you would say an accomplished military career to any degree. But my boy, I got to be honest with you, none of that translates to real life unarmed combat situations. And anybody who's ever been in the capacity of the military to any degree, they understand one thing. The type of unarmed combat training that you get in the military, quite honestly, is way more inferior than what you would get at a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu gym, at a Phil Nurse gym, at a Greg Jackson's gym, at our Renegade MMA down in Leon Edwards' gym, or Tom Aspinall's gym, or any top gyms in the world that include TriStar, that includes SBG Ireland, that includes AKA and Team Eagle, and everything in between. Okay? That is what we are dealing with right there. Hold on just a second. Let me just make sure this sound is correct. Mic check. 1 2 1 2. All right, sorry about that. Just wanted to make sure the sound was good. Okay, so where was I? What was I talking about? Yes, I believe I was talking about certain specific gyms that you train at. Okay, so yeah, I think it is rather important what type of gym you train at, because obviously the type of challenges that you're going to experience. And hold on a second, what was I talking about? You know what? A lot of people sometimes they forget about what they talk about midstream, right? But no one ever really goes and bothers to replay on their own just to see exactly what they said. So, where- What were we talking about here? Oh, okay, okay. I got it now. Okay. So I know exactly where I was at. So what I was saying was, yes, the type of military combat training that the unarmed training that you get in the military is not anywhere close superior to Gracie or the top level gyms that you get around the MMA gyms that you see that are fighting championships out there, right? So in other words, yes, we were talking about the Don't Unfriend Me show host. He's saying, yeah, come test your MMA. I'm like, my boy, you're 50 years old. You're a little bit battered in terms of the amount of stress that your knees have taken. And obviously the military, if you know anything about it, there's a lot of programs where you have to deal with, let's say, carrying a sack all year round. And look, he was doing this for a long amount of time, right? Like, you're not going to get the best recovery rate in this particular matter, nor will you get the best results, because by the end of the day, there's a difference between military fighting and sport fighting. And both of those things have to be respected as what they are. So that's really the reality of that. But now let us move on to the next subject and next matter at hand. By the way, this is not going to be the last of us talking about the Tyan Booth story. Obviously, I'm going to go into the UFC portion of this particular live stream. Finally, right? We're finally talking about UFC. But hey, I'm going to mark this down right here. 1 hour, 39 minutes of this live stream. UFC 302 talk is going to be the subject, and that's going to be in 20 seconds, less than 20 seconds from now. We're going to talk UFC 302. Okay, in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that concludes the Tyan Booth story of this particular live stream. Now moving on to UFC 302, Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. Now, what can I tell you about this particular matchup? In all true to God honesty, I'm a little bit worried for Dustin Poirier. Obviously, I am a big Islam Makhachev fan. I'm a big Khabib supporter. I love his whole entire team. I've actually gotten a chance to speak with his dad over the phone, and I'll give you guys pictures to prove it on the community tab of this particular channel. I'm probably going to drop that sometime today or just right after the live stream, but be on the lookout for that. In other words, I'm going to be biased towards Islam Makhachev. However, as somebody that commentates on this sport, that analyzes it, that loves it, that looks at the X's and O's, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm very, very scared for Dustin Poirier, and I'm going to tell you why. He said that he is planning on retiring after this fight. This is his one-way ticket. The one-way ticket of Dustin Poirier. Now, why is that significant? I'm going to tell you why. You cannot go into a fight like this. I'm telling you right now, going into a fight like this is going to be very detrimental to his health, and it always has historically. Now, why do I say that? You guys got to understand something. In the time that anybody has said that they wanted to go in a cage and they had 1 foot in and 1 foot out, the problem with that situation is that you're already mentally checked out. Just like Tyan Booth. And by the way, I told you guys, I know that I had a timestamp of when I'm going to talk about these particular subjects. This isn't the last that we're going to talk about Tyan Booth, right? But what I will say is that there is a checkout point that Dustin Poirier has right now. He said, I'm ready to retire. I'm ready to go into taking care of my family, being home with the kids, and this and that. All these wholesome conversations that many people love to have when they love to spew this idea to the world that they are the quintessential family man, right? But from the technical aspect and the mental aspect of Dustin Poirier, I got to tell you guys, I'm very worried for Dustin Poirier because he is mentally checked out, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and Islam is all the way in right now. There was a point where Khabib was all in and all out, and that was during the Justin Gaethje fight. You know why? He said to himself, hey, you know what? I'm going to retire because my dad had just passed away. So as a result, guess what he does? He got kicked in ways that I've never seen him get kicked in any fights. And that has to somehow really play a factor of some degree, right? That has to play some kind of degree. Okay, before I go into this, I'm going to play you guys a video that I did a month ago when this fight was signed. And then right after this, we're going to go into analyzing this fight from a technical standpoint. And then we're going to go through the entire card. But this was me finding out that this fight was signed way before, mind you, way before anybody found out. This date right here was a month ago. So what are we looking at? April 9th. April 9th, 2024, which was last month. Okay, this is the technical and psychological breakdown, and we're going to break down the entire card after this video as well. Enjoy. That he will be fighting Islam Makhachev for an upcoming title fight. And by the way, I don't think that he deserves it. And this is also a fight that Islam Makhachev doesn't need. For one, you have to understand, Dustin Poirier is just coming off of a win off of Benoit Saint-Denis. The possible and real deserving title contender of this fight is already busy, which is who? None other than Justin Gaethje, who's now busy fighting Max Holloway coming up this weekend. By the way, as you're watching this, this is literally the last day of fasting in Ramadan, which sort of symbolizes the fact that Islam Makhachev is now ready to go into a full training camp and set to face either one of these contenders, but more than likely, it will probably be Dustin Poirier just based on the elimination alone. A lot of these different 155ers have either been busy, undeserving based on their rankings, or just the sheer fact that Dustin Poirier came off of a big win, and being a big name, I think sort of lends itself into, well, the idea that the UFC goes with the guys that has the most clout rather than the guys that are the most deserving. So with that in mind, let's break down some psychological and technical aspects of this fight. For one, you have to understand, Dustin Poirier has already fought Khabib Nurmagomedov. And as a result, a lot of people are going to look at this fight and think to themselves, well, you know what? Perhaps maybe this is a fight that it seems we've already seen. Given the simple fact that a lot of people compare Islam Makhachev to Khabib Nurmagomedov almost as twins of some sort. But here's something that you have to understand. In the career trajectory of both these men, and I'm talking about Dustin Poirier and Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev has one loss in his record. Back in 2015 against Adriano Martins, was knocked out, but then came back ever since then with a 13-fight win streak, and 8 of them were basically finishes. And so as a result of that, he's improved since then. Dustin Poirier has lost to Justin Gaethje last year in the summer for the BMF belt, only for him to bounce back against Benoit Saint-Denis in a very impressive performance, mind you. But at the same time, it kind of tells you that these two guys are their own men and they are their own matchup, exclusive away from the Khabib Nurmagomedov result, which happened back in 2019 in UFC 242 in Abu Dhabi with Dustin Poirier versus Khabib. And obviously, here's a couple of technical aspects that you can take. And I'm going to jump around from the technical to the mental breakdown. And I'm not going to decompartmentalize this into different parts because I know how people are when it comes to, let's say, their ADD or their lack of attention span. So here it goes. The psychological part is that Dustin Poirier is going to think in his mind that this is nothing like Khabib, and he wants to prove that, meaning that he's going to go into this fight perhaps maybe underestimating Islam Makhachev, not considering the fact that perhaps maybe he's a better version of Khabib. But Islam Makhachev will also think to himself that perhaps maybe I have a much better outcome than Khabib based on the fact that he knows he's a better striker than Khabib. And I'm talking about Islam Makhachev being a better striker than Khabib. He also believes that he's a much more improved version of Khabib. So there's going to be an underestimation on the part of Islam Makhachev as well. With Dustin Poirier, you also have to understand the psychological parts of this. He already has a hot sauce company going on that, by the way, no pun intended, is red hot, really great with his business. On top of that, has made an insurmountable amount of money from the Conor McGregor fight. And on top of really just his daily income from the businesses and the commercials that he's involved in. So you have to think, is Dustin Poirier motivated for this fight? And here's the thing you have to understand. In the Western world, one of the biggest things that we are motivated by is consumerism, and not only that, capitalism. So as a result, here's something that you have to understand. As Muslims, we're a little bit different, okay? And I'm going to tell you why. Islam Makhachev already has all the money in the world. He's been having money dating back to when Khabib started getting money, because guess what? That's just the kind of family they are. When one guy makes the money, the other guy has all the money in the world as well, and that's just what it is. So he's always had a certain motivation of a killer instinct that is beyond the capitalistic drive that most people in the Western world have. So in other words, Dustin Poirier may already be content with everything that he has, other than the fact that he wants the glory of a championship, because guess who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants that. But the bottom line is, you have to ask yourself, how bad do you want it when the fight starts to get hard? And this is where the technical aspect comes into play. We know that Dustin Poirier can be easily taken down, especially with a formidable wrestler. He himself can take guys down with a great wrestling prowess if, let's say, he was to take on somebody like Conor McGregor. When he took on Conor McGregor, he said that, you know what? This guy feels a whole lot lighter in terms of not giving the amount of resistance that he would have expected from the clinch positions, from the takedown positions, and perhaps maybe a lot of that lends itself to the reality that Conor McGregor is super content with the commercialized and the capitalistic successes that he's had in his career. So as a result, perhaps maybe you could say that that lended itself to the reality of your performance going into that ring. Sure, everybody wants to be a tough guy. Everybody wants to be the toughest guy in the world. But the problem is, when you already have everything that you want, are you really that guy? And let me steer off of the fight game for a little bit and talk about some people's personal lives. Most people, when they start living in the suburbs, all of a sudden, a lot of things start going away. Their sense of drive, their sense of killer instinct. Not only that, a lot of guys that made it and have already lived that American dream in a white picket fence suburb, all of a sudden become fat, all of a sudden become complacent. And as a result, they become a shell of themselves as the young, hungry lion that was poor and was living in an apartment rather than living in a nice neighborhood that they have already accomplished. And this is a reality for a lot of people. Let me tell you where this is not a reality for some people. Us Muslim guys, we have a warrior culture that I believe really lends itself not only to the business world, the corporate world, and any type of field of competition or any type of field of professionalism that I think is absolutely unmatched to the Western world, that is, quite frankly, motivated by consumerism, capitalism, in which this fight will be affected in that particular matter at hand. So guess what? Here's something that you have to understand about Dustin Poirier as well. First of all, he has one foot out the door and one out the other. He's taken a lot of damages all throughout his career. Sure, has Islam Makhachev taken some damages as well in terms of maybe the hard sparring sessions that the American Kickboxing Academy out here in San Jose is really known for? Absolutely. He's taken a few damages in that, but not in the way that Dustin Poirier has not only done it in a gym, but has also done it in the fights that we've seen with the likes of Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, and the list goes on and on with the different names and the wars that Dustin Poirier has lended himself into. Eddie Alvarez, also another name to throw in there. Just all these names and all these wars that he's experienced. At some point, he's going to break and he's going to get damaged. Now, obviously, he was very lucky to get past Benoit Saint-Denis. Even though Benoit Saint-Denis is a tough guy, French Special Forces, an upcoming 155er. I wanted to interject on this particular matter at hand, first and foremost, right? So obviously, I'm going to go back to the video for just a second. You're back in the present time right now, as I took you guys on a time machine from 1 month ago and back into the present time right now. So I wanted to interject on some things that I said there that I thought was important to drop as a gem in response to my own video, and also continuing the topic of Tyan Booth. So just like Tyan Booth, who had a checkout mentality when he walked out of the ring, so too does Dustin Poirier when it comes to going into this particular matchup. Now, there were times where I've listened to Tyan Booth's stream where he talks about, man, you know what? I'm in here and I'm literally lost for words of why I'm here about to take a punch when I can just go home and make money on YouTube, sitting here drinking and smoking, making it just an easy payday rather than just being in here getting punched in the face. That's what you call being checked out. That's where Dustin Poirier is at right now. So the question is, what is going to happen when you walk into the cage against Islam Makhachev, who is all in, and you have all these other things in the back of your mind saying something to the effect of, well, I have the hot sauce brand, I got all these other commercials, I got all these other advertisements and ads that come my way. On top of that, all these different businesses, the Good Fight Foundation that Dustin Poirier has going on. It's very easy to check out, because if your only mentality and your only identity is being a fighter, well, guess what? You're going to fight tooth and nail to keep that. But if your identity is multiple, meaning that you got to serve multiple masters, you're an entrepreneur. You're an online influencer. You are a content creator. You are all these things but a fighter. Islam Makhachev is none of those things. Does Islam Makhachev have a YouTube? Yes, but it's not self-driven. It's team-driven. Does Islam Makhachev have a PR team, a management? Yes. And he doesn't touch anything that doesn't deal with fighting other than just being in the gym all day. There are guys out there that go and manage themselves. And guess what? They manage other people too. So in turn, when they get into these fights and it gets hard, there's a part in their brain that says, you know what? My man, I'm ready to check out. You know why? Because I have all these other things I can do outside of fighting, and I see it. I see it with people in the gyms. I see it with people who, well, let me just say this. Going back to Tyan Booth, right? When he went into that fight, during the night of which he had walked out, he was walking around in the locker room. And I got to be honest with you, right? I'm not one of these guys that takes a shower in the gym, like literally butt naked, right? With no clothes on or anything like that, right? There are guys out there that walk around gyms shamelessly like that. I'm definitely not one of those guys. Now, why do they walk around shamelessly like that? Well, a big part of it is because they feel very comfortable to whatever shameless degree they have. But nonetheless, if you're in a locker room on fight day, shouldn't this be normal to you? Shouldn't you not be weirded out that there's other men that are going to change in there? Tyan Booth, he had the weirdest reaction to walking in a particular dressing room. I'm going to talk about that, but first I'm going to mark the timestamp on this. So on 1 hour, So there it is on 1 hour and 57-minute time frame, which is going to be less than 30 seconds from now. I'm going to talk about Tyan's weird reaction to the locker room on fight day. And I think that there's some important subjects to sort of delve into when we talk about that, because I'm going to go into his psyche. Not only am I going to go into his psyche, I'm going to go inside his internal motivation that led us to this particular day where he walked out on his fight. So Tyan Booth walks into a locker room. He looks around and he says, "What's going on here? I'm in here with all these dudes." And I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, unless there are other female fighters that are on the card, which I'm sure there are, but they just weren't on your card, I'm sure they would be in here too. Now, what is it with his obsession that, oh man, there has to be girls in here? Oh, there's no girls in here. There's just a bunch of dudes in here that are just walking around. Now, prior to this segment that I'm doing right now, I told you guys that I'm not one of those people that will just walk freely in a locker room with no reservations on what I got on or the lack of what I don't got on or things of that nature, right? It's just not me, right? I'm going to put on a towel. I'm going to have extra towels. I'm going to make sure that nobody is looking at me in a very compromised situation. Okay, that's who I am. But at the same time, on fight day, I'm not going to sit in a locker room and get weirded out because there's only dudes in there. What was it in his mind that he's thinking like, oh, I got to be around females all the time or this and that? Well, again, my boy, this is the reason why you attract a certain type of birds that you do, because you have this mentality to where you always got to be the ladies' man or this and that, like as if you're a teenager trying to somehow prove that you have more bodies on your account than anybody else does. It's just a very immature thing to really go about in life. But hey, again, that is also the same night that he quit. And why? Because his mind is in the wrong places. And when you don't have that discipline, you don't have that aspect of abstinence, but more importantly, that aspect of motivation, you're going to quit, just like Dustin Poirier. And this is the reason why I wanted to stop midstream while I was playing that video to sort of give you guys an emphasis on this particular matter at hand. So going back to Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier, what can I say about this? This is one of those situations, really, where you could potentially see Dustin Poirier quit mid-fight. And these are the reasons why. Just like Tyan Booth, just like him, obviously, Dustin Poirier is way more successful than Tyan Booth, right? That's not breaking news by any stretch of the imagination. But you could say that both of them are happy where they're at with what they're making. Now, obviously, Dustin Poirier is not making Conor McGregor money, but he's making enough money to be happy where he's at. Just like me, I'm happy where I'm at. I have a great life. I'm not going to try to be braggadocious about it. But again, if you want to measure by metrics, I probably have a better living standard than Tyan Booth ever will. And you got to take into consideration, I live literally in one of the hardest places in the world to buy a house. And I mean, look, I'm not going to make this about a braggadocious thing because I just don't think that he would come back at me with anything that deals with metrics other than his views on his YouTube. And that's about it. But nonetheless, that is a reality. There is a checkout point for certain people, and that's what we're emphasizing here. So back to this video. It just wasn't enough because Dustin Poirier's experience lended itself to get him through that fight. But if you want to take on Islam Makhachev, you need more than just experience. You need more than just great attributes. You need a lifetime of work that really lends itself to a warrior lifestyle that doesn't deviate from, let's say, having after parties after your fights, or this aspect of, well, you know what, I'm just going to go take it easy today, or take it easy because I already have money in the bank. Guess what? Khabib has had money in the bank for a long time, even after the Conor McGregor fight. And he could have retired right there. What did he do? He went on and took on Dustin Poirier. And by the way, trained like a Spartan for that particular fight. And again, I'm not here to promote the Spartans in any way, because if you know anything about their particular history, it doesn't really lend itself to, let's say, the manly nature that we intend to have. Okay, let's just put it like that. I urge you to take a look at the Spartans if you know what I mean. But not to stir off, here's what it is. He trained like he was going to war. And as a result, the results spoke for itself. He won that fight. The Justin Gaethje fight did the same thing, a very dangerous fight. He made it look easy. Sure. Did he struggle? Absolutely. Why would you not struggle when you are fighting the best guys in the world? But as a result, the sheer toughness and the preparation and the technicality that he's built over the years all accumulated into him being able to dominate that fight, but also survive the harsh realities of, let's say, the back and forth, and also the reality of that these guys are just top level guys and are going to get you at some moments. But overall, the result lended itself to the reality that these guys are unbreakable. And I'm talking about Khabib and Islam. Not only are they unbreakable, they have literally hours and hours upon training, to where a lot of these guys in the Western world sort of lended themselves into having a party lifestyle, or some sort of little break, or, you know what, let's just have a little bit of drinks here and there, or let's just do, drink a little bit of whiskey after a fight, and maybe do a little bit of some recreational drugs. There is none of that when it comes to these Muslim fighters. And this is something that you have to understand if you want to fight these guys and be at their level, but also even have a slight chance to take them on. So I don't see Dustin Poirier really having any chances in this fight, other than the fact that he will get a few guillotine attempts, based on the fact that when you shoot for a double leg takedown or a single leg takedown, those opportunities present itself, and it's going to be an opening that he's going to try and take advantage of, but will miserably fail, in the same way that he tried to slap on that guillotine against Khabib. He tried to slap it on Benoit Saint-Denis. How did that go? Obviously, he was able to escape it. Why? Because Benoit Saint-Denis was tough enough to get away from that, but also had enough technical prowess to be able to do that. But when you're dealing with somebody like Islam, it is more than just technical prowess or the attributes of having high proficiency in grappling. It is a lot more than that. Now you're taking on a guy who grew up in a mountainous area, by the way, which is the reason why they're able to push a certain level of pace that can't be matched, not even with the likes of Colby Covington, maybe with the likes of Colby Covington, depending on if he can fight somebody that is within that level, maybe somebody like Khamzat. But that type of environment, I think, is the reason why they are who they are, and why they are able to lend themselves into very devastating results against their opponents. So Dustin Poirier, I think, has a lot of thinking to do when it comes to training for this fight. And I think that is going to overload him. But also, you got to understand, he has new responsibilities that lend themselves into, let's say, this particular aspect of his new ventures of business, being a father, and things of that nature. I got to tell you, a lot of these Muslim guys in these particular instances, they don't have the same issue or the same problem that, let's say, most of these other guys have when they have to do, let's say, 50-50 type of household chores when it comes to, let's say, getting their training done. Their families are all in, whereas maybe you could say with the Western fighters, it's not so much of a reality on their end. And I'm sorry if this may offend some people, but I'm only speaking the truth in terms of what it is that these guys can lend themselves to in terms of their career paths and what their lifestyles look like behind the scenes. You see, a lot of people are only looking at the aspect of what they see from the superficial side of what they see in the fights. Let's say Dustin Poirier looking good from the Benoit Saint-Denis fight. Well, is he going to do that against Islam? Whereas with Islam has a great striking prowess, a whole lot better than Khabib, to where he's not going to be able to knock him out in that particular instance, at least not easily. On top of the fact that he has an ever-evolving Muay Thai game that he displayed against Alexander Volkov. Knocked him out with a head kick, which, by the way, a lot of people did not expect. So what is it that Dustin Poirier is going to have to expect in this fight going in against Dustin Poirier? We don't know. We don't know what Islam Makhachev is working on. Well, I sort of know, but I can't tell the world. But put it like this. I don't think that Dustin Poirier is going to be doing the same amount of training or the same amount of preparation that Islam Makhachev has. And by the way, sorry to tell you, he's taken on basically the better version of Khabib, whereas Islam Makhachev is in his prime of his life. Dustin Poirier is 35 years old at a 155 division, which, by the way, doesn't really give you any advantage in that particular weight class in that age category. But then again, we also said that about Benoit Saint-Denis. What's the difference? Benoit Saint-Denis is not Islam Makhachev. And that's just the reality of it. So what else can we look at in this fight? I'm going to read to you an article that I read on, where is this article? This particular article on Islam Makhachev. Let me see here. Okay, so Matt Brown on MMAfighting.com, he argues for Dustin Poirier's title shot against Islam Makhachev. Anything he wants, he should get. So on paper, Dustin Poirier probably shouldn't be considered for a #1 title contender in the lightweight division. Logic. However, that might go out the door for the potential fight for Islam Makhachev. Why? Why is that going to go out the door? For the simple fact that, let's just be honest, Dustin Poirier is a big name. Now, ever since he flattened Benoit Saint-Denis at UFC 299, the one-time interim lightweight champion shifted gears to push for a fight against Islam Makhachev, who currently doesn't have an opponent set to date for his return. Obviously, Justin Gaethje in UFC 300 is taking on Max Holloway. The man who knocked out Poirier last July faces Max Holloway, while the former champion, the guy that Islam Makhachev beat, Charles Oliveira, is taking on Arman Tsarukyan. Now, we could argue Arman Tsarukyan deserves a title shot because guess what? He came into the UFC fighting Islam Makhachev, fighting basically the hardest fight of his life, the hardest fight in the division in his debut. And yet here he is still winning and still on a streak with the UFC after his first debut loss. And so the winners of either of those fights could argue for a title shot. But the UFC welterweight Matt Brown says the Louisiana native has built up enough goodwill and resume plastered with enough legendary performances that no one will really complain if he faced with Islam Makhachev. So in other words, what Matt Brown is trying to say is that I don't think his resume really matters or his legendary status. It really is about the competitive architecture that is in front of you. He doesn't deserve it, but it's his way of coping with the idea that he should get the fight. And quite frankly, Islam should take it because it's a big money fight for him. And Dustin Poirier is a big name. And I would argue probably even bigger than Justin Gaethje at this point, even if he had defeated him. So also Matt Brown goes on to say that why not? Give him a shot. Brown said on The Fighter versus the Writer. That's all I've got to say about it. Why not? Let's go. Dustin deserves anything he wants, and he should get it. Obviously, a bit of an emotional fallacy on the part of Matt Brown, not really talking with logic. But guess what? Emotional fallacies in the fight game really does help in terms of promoting you. But not only that, also getting you title shots that you don't deserve. And he also says, deserving or not, Poirier also has time on his side. What does he mean by that? With the two key lightweight matchups at UFC 300, which is going on this week. By the way, this is the last day of Ramadan, as you know, which, by the way, Islam is going to be in full speed of a training camp as a result. And seemingly unlikely, anybody from that card will be unable to return as early as June 1st. So, by the way, 302 or 303 is a possible dates for these particular fights with Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier, and they don't have a clear main event for these particular cards yet. They have 301 set for UFC Rio. Obviously, 300 is going on this week. After that, there really is no clear main event in these cards. And by the way, Islam could easily slide in there and fill that in. Makhachev has also expressed interest in the fight, which, by the way, this is the reason why I feel that this fight is really signed, sealed, and delivered, even though there is no official word, because all you need is Islam Makhachev to agree, Dustin Poirier to agree, and they both like it. Dustin Poirier wants the opportunity. Islam Makhachev wants the clout of beating a big name. Also expressed interest in this fight, so it seems that the matchmakers have an easy job when determining the next person to get a title shot, on top of the fact that these cards are not filled yet. Poirier hasn't rattled off numerous wins in a row and is not sitting at an absolute top of the division. And Brown believes none of that really matters. Well, Matt Brown, it does matter, but if you're talking about what matters in terms of business, why not? You can't complain anytime Dustin Poirier gets a title shot. Of course not. That is if you're a casual fan. He deserves anything to give him, anything good, any title shot. Just give it to him. It's effing Dustin Poirier. Again, more emotional fallacy from Matt Brown, but nonetheless, emotional fallacies is what gets us big title fights and money-making cards at that. Has he ever put on a bad fight? No. Again, emotional fallacy. Has he been right? Yes. Emotional fallacy. If you want to call that a bad fight, call that a bad fight, but he goes out there and goes to war every time and does his thing. By the way, same as Matt Brown, he likes that because he fights the same way. But guess what? This is also going to leave you vulnerable against a very technically sound Islam Makhachev. He goes on to say he does his thing, does it with respect and honor, carries himself well, speaks well, just an effing great guy. Again, a more emotional fallacy by the CTE-ridden Matt Brown. And even if Poirier isn't technically the top contender at 155, he remains one of the biggest draws in the sport. Once again, I agree with Matt Brown on that. That is exactly why he should get this fight, on top of the fact that everybody is busy. That could help Makhachev decide, and the champ also seek to define his legacy as a dominant title holder in arguably UFC's deepest division. Couldn't agree more with Matt Brown. Beating Poirier not only adds him to an A-list names of Makhachev's resume, it potentially sets him up for a run of title defenses. Absolutely. There's some killers in that division, Brown said. Islam's got his work cut out for him. Very true. Islam is a killer. I would pick him to lose against anybody, but a murderer's row like this, he gets through those guys no matter how this plays out. He gets 4 out of 5 title defenses, and what an effing run. I agree with Matt Brown on that. By the way, sorry if I'm saying that you have CTE and all that. I'm just saying that that's a possibility considering how you fight and the style that you lend yourself to. That is a possibility, just like Dustin Poirier, which is why he has all these emotional fallacies in sort of supporting him as this exciting fighter. But nonetheless, those types of exciting fights is what makes the money. As much as popularity and hype shouldn't necessarily determine who gets a title shot, Brown goes on to say, by the way, Matt Brown, to respond to that, it does in a way, and this is why you're saying this, because you're right, and I'm right about this too, and we agree on that. But almost every athlete on the roster knows differently. To add to that, Poirier just stomped a highly touted prospect in Zant, and he certainly seems ready for Makhachev. I want to see nothing but good things in the world for Dustin Poirier and for the rest of his life. Matt Brown said, give him the effing title shot. Let's go. Let's go. All right. So Matt Brown, you're 100% right about a lot of things. And I like the fact that he was very objective in basically explaining that not only does he not deserve it, but he deserves it at the same time. And this is literally why I'm explaining this to you in this type of particular matter. So that is what we have going on for Dustin Poirier and Islam Makhachev. And I hope you guys like this content. Don't forget to like and subscribe. All right. So we are back live right now in the present moment of time. So what I got to say about that, obviously, Dustin Poirier has a lot of his work cut out for him against Islam Makhachev, and that goes without saying. Now, one of the main topics that we had talked about prior was if you are checked out when it comes to, let's say, fighting, right? Because you have other options in life. Sorry about that. My mic had got cut off there for a second. Let me get this. All right, here we go. The microphone is back. Okay. So what was I saying? Um, okay, mic check 1 2 1 2. Okay, so what I was saying was that some people are checked out when it comes to having different options. So what I was saying was that, yes, Errol Spence once said that he doesn't have a plan B. And this is very important to understand the determination of every fighter, right? There's a lot of fighters out there that have plan Bs. Plan Bs. And by the way, in the spirit of sort of giving tribute to Tyan Booth, I'm going to give you guys a couple of stories right now about some guys that I've trained with, right? And I'm going to lead this into the New Jersey fight stories because I'm going to get to that particular segment of the video as well. And why? Well, simply because this fight, this next weekend is taking place in New Jersey. It's a place that I'm from, even though I'm now residing in the West Coast and have been for a long time. But I've had a certain period of time there and certain stories when it comes to the streets and street fights that I could share regarding New Jersey. So we're not going to forget about that subject, but we're also going to talk about let's see, the aspects of why you can't have a plan B. Oh, and some stories of guys that I've trained with that I think you guys would really be intrigued by, right? Because obviously it's within the storylines of a plan B. Okay, so let me mark this down right here. I believe we're going to talk about this in 2 hours and 20-minute mark, of which I'm going to write right here. By the way, I'm literally doing a timestamp as I'm going at it with you guys right now. So hold on just a second. All right. So in the 2 hour and 20-minute mark, I'm going to talk about this. And I believe that this sort of really lends itself to this particular subject that we're talking about. Should a fighter have plan B? And this is in regards to Urijah Faber on Angelo Trevino. Now, for those of you that are in the Sacramento area and have trained in Team Alpha Male, I'm sure you guys have heard of Angelo Trevino. I'm going to give you guys a little story, okay? Angelo Trevino, when he was a high school kid, I trained with him. He trained with me in Muay Thai Lao, a Muay Thai gym that was located on Howe Avenue, owned by Andy K, the former Muay Thai trainer of Urijah Faber. And then after I stopped training with him, then I went to go train at Urijah Faber's gym in Team Alpha Male, along with Angelo Trevino. And in that same place, that's where me and Angelo got to train with the likes of all the big names that you've seen come to Team Alpha Male. Okay, so Urijah said something to Angelo Trevino that I think sort of lends itself to this story. Should fighters have a plan B? Urijah Faber told Angelo Trevino dude, you can't go out there and have a job. You can't go out there and work while you're fighting at the same time. Well, you want to know why Angelo Trevino did the opposite? Because a lot of people behind the scenes were telling him to do exactly that. Go out and work while you train. Okay? Because guess what? You know what Urijah Faber did? He created a haven for fighters when he started buying houses in his earlier years. When he started making money from the WEC days, he started buying one house, then another house, and another house. Then he got the K-Swiss deal. Then he bought another house and another house. Then he got the Ultimate Fighter deal where he was featured with Conor McGregor, then got another house, a whole bunch of title fights, got another house. Point of the matter is, Urijah Faber bought a whole bunch of houses for him to house fighters. And in the process, many of these fighters, I got to tell you, a lot of them didn't have jobs. And quite frankly, if you're trying to make it to the next level and you don't have the resources and help the way that Khabib does, the way that BJ Penn did when he was a kid, the way that all these other fighters that have all these different multitudes of resources that allows them to just train and nothing else, well, I'll tell you, you're going to be left behind. Now, I'm not here to discuss anything about Angelo Trevino's career or have any criticisms of it or any kind, because I got to tell you, on the positive side of things, this was a kid that I've trained with since he was in high school. When he was a high school wrestler, not only that, while he was a pancreas fighter. In other words, he was doing mixed martial arts literally at a very young age where they just basically strike on the body and not to the head, but basically doing mixed martial arts to the form that we understand it to be. Not only that, he's helped me prepare for amateur kickboxing fights, and that was the one where I won that trophy in 2010 in Modesto. He helped me out with that fight. And we've trained together over the years and this and that. So these are all positive interactions that I have with him. But you guys know Urijah Faber. This is public information that he's mentioned out there. And once again, you know the old saying, it's never disrespect when you're telling the truth. Okay? So that's one thing that you have to understand, okay, is that a lot of people have a problem with speaking the truth. Speaking of which, it really rubs people the wrong way. And quite frankly, it's one of the many reasons why I've gotten into a lot of street fights when I was a kid, okay, which is going to lead me now into the street fight stories of New Jersey, okay? And I'm going to mark that down for 2 hours and 25 minutes on the timestamp. All right, so we are now at the 2 hour and 25 minute mark, and we're going to talk about New Jersey street fights. Okay, so as you guys know, I live in the West Coast, Sacramento. I go up and down the coast, studying, traveling, training, doing all types of different things across this beautiful land of California, right? So 100% I claim California to the highest degree that I could, right? And I will talk great about it, speak positively about it, and represent to the fullest. There was a part of my life where I grew up in New Jersey, and this is where I'm going to talk about street fight stories that I've experienced growing up in New Jersey. So obviously, before we left off the 2 hour and 25 minute mark, I had mentioned that growing up, I've had a lot of street fights because a lot of people feel extremely disrespected when you tell them the truth. For example, I'm guilty of this as well. Okay, growing up in New Jersey, I got into it with kids based on them saying, you got your butt whooped or this and that, right? Everybody gets your butt whooped at some point, right? Nobody just all of a sudden wakes up and becomes this super tough guy overnight. Nobody. Okay, and that also includes Francis Ngannou. Now, obviously, Francis Ngannou is the way that he is just by understanding the stories that we've known about him, working in the minefields, having a dad who was a street fighter himself, really lending itself to a positive genetic makeup for him to become who he is today. Well, nonetheless, this is the reality of a lot of people who are tough guys, people who are high-level fighters, guys who have become gangsters, guys who have become high-level operators in the military. All these guys have one thing in common. They all faced a certain adversity in their life, whether it was their environment or whether it was, let's say, their personal experiences or maybe certain traumas that they've experienced. And I got to tell you, if you grew up in New Jersey, boy, let me tell you, you're going to run across a lot of guys that think they're tough guys. Okay. And then there are guys that just pretend that they are. And then there are guys that just are really good with groups around them. So I'm going to try not to mention any names here, right? And if I do, I have to apologize, but then a part of me is not. But okay, I'll tell you this one story. This one name, let's call him John Doe. Okay, that's the most basic and generic name that we can come up with. I had beef with this kid growing up. Later on, I ended up violating him, and I'm not going to tell you how, but you would imagine that I got him back. Just listen to the story and try to understand where I'm going with this. So this guy, John Doe, we're at a party. Literally, it was his house party. Okay, John Doe, while I was growing up in New Jersey, he was friends with this. Can I mention the specific group of people they were? Yeah, I think I can. Okay. So, this guy rolled with a Filipino racing crew, right? And I'll mention their names because I don't think they're even around anymore. But if you're a New Jersey City head, if you're from Jersey City, you probably know who they are. And if you know anything about Manila Avenue in Jersey City back in the early 2000s, you probably heard of them. So the name of their group was Nassau, right? N-word, always smoking a day. That is the name of their crew. So they're basically a hybrid of a smoking crew / racing crew. All these dudes, they had all these souped up Hondas. They would tear up the back seats and things of that nature to make it lighter. They were with that business. So I got into it with one of their members at his house. He tries to play me and tries to kick me out. And then all of his guys were outside, right? And, we're getting into this little standoff or whatever. And then I'm basically telling him like, hey, if you want to fight me, come here. Because I wasn't about to fight 6, 7 other guys, right? So what happened in the process? He ended up backing away because I was daring him to get in a one-on-one fight. And I felt like if I had moved any closer to his circumference, him and maybe 6 of his other homeboys that was going to jump me. So I decided, I was like, you know what? I want you to come out here and fight me one-on-one. So it's kind of calling him bluff in a way, right? Like he didn't want to respond, but then at the same time, I'm not just going to go in there and just potentially get jumped at close range position. It just wouldn't be the smartest thing to do. Well, okay, lo and behold, let me just say this. A couple of months later, I got him back. I got him back in the worst way possible. And quite frankly, I'm not going to tell you how, but I just want you to use your imagination. Okay, but put it this way. Nope. The best way I can tell you is nobody passed away or became unalive. That's the most that I can say. But let's just say that I got my get back on that one. Okay. So that's one New Jersey fight story that I could tell you. And obviously that one took place in Jersey City and Union, somewhere at that. So I'm going to give you another New Jersey fight story that took place in the southern part of New Jersey. So there's a southern part of New Jersey in the 609, right? Growing up in the northern part of New Jersey, whether it was Union, New Jersey, Jersey City, and then somewhere in my sophomore year of high school, I moved to Old Bridge, New Jersey. So I literally lived there for like about, 2 years and then left home after that. But nonetheless, in the North New Jersey scene, right, there was all these Filipino hip hoppers, break dancers, and taggers that I was hanging out with, right? A lot of them had gang affiliations from the West Coast. A lot of them had local gang affiliations in New York and whatnot. So that was sort of the group of people that I was surrounded with in my earlier teens in New Jersey, right? So, okay, I got a group of these friends in Jersey City. One of them, an older guy, was sort of like a strong family friend of mine, the best way to describe it, right? But he has his own homeboys. And his own homeboys, sometimes when I come around, I was younger and this and that, they would sort of clown me like, oh, yeah, this and that. You know how it is. When you're the younger guy of the crew, it becomes very easy for you to get picked on and become sort of a low-hanging fruit target for the older guys. Okay, so here's what they don't know. I had my own different set of crew of people in South Jersey. Because here's something that a lot of people don't know about me. When I was younger, I used to rap. And with that whole rap scene, that whole freestyle scene, that whole battle rap scene that I was involved with in New Jersey, I met a lot of guys that were from down south. Okay, guys that were from the Trenton area, guys that were from the 609 area in the ocean side of New Jersey, Point Pleasant and whatnot. What else was in that area? So yeah, that's the southern area. So we get into a party. These guys that I knew and that older gentleman that I had told you about, right? He brings his homeboys, the ones that always clown me. They go down to South Jersey with me at a party, right? So guess what happens? One of my homeboys, the older guy, his homeboys, tried to get at somebody's girl at the party, right? It was one of my friend's mutual friend, right? So he was upset that this guy that I had brought, okay, by the way, in association with this older dude that I hung out with, was trying to talk to his girl, disrespecting him. So what happened in the process? We all ended up getting into a fight. Well, not me, but they jumped that guy that my buddy from Jersey City had brought up north. They jumped him, and it started an entire spiral of beef that I had with those guys that eventually just got squashed because they understood that, hey, listen, you got to take responsibility for your own. You got to take accountability for your own actions. Okay, because he's thinking I set him up. Now, why would he think that I set him up? And by the way, I got to tell you guys, this is the reason why a lot of people in New Jersey are very hyper skeptical of certain people, right? They don't just let you in certain circles or anything like that. They don't just let you hang out with anybody or anything like that. Like out here in California, I got to be honest with you. Even though there is a strong gang community out here in California, I swear to you, it is probably very easy to infiltrate their gangs just based on the fact that, well, they don't check you extensively with your resume. They don't background check you. They don't look into you. Quite frankly, they don't really care as long as they think you're a cool person, and that's it. In the East Coast of America, whether that would be New Jersey, Boston, New York, all the way down to Florida, these specific people in America, those people are hyper skeptical of just letting anybody in their circle. And this is why. Here's a guy that got jumped because he knew a mutual friend of mine. We came to the party in South Jersey. by the way, a whole group of people that I'm affiliated with that they don't know anything about. And then he goes and gets jumped in the process because he goes and tries to violate somebody's girl. Not looking at the fact that he did that, trying to violate somebody's girl, but blaming me because I'm the one that brought them to the party. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you guys right now in terms of morals of the story and things of that nature? So in other words, let me recap the story for you, okay, just so you guys understand. I got two groups of friends, one in South Jersey and one in North Jersey. The ones in North Jersey, I bring them to a party down south, and those same guys in North Jersey get jumped. By the way, those very same guys that make fun of me because I was a younger guy of the crew, the North Jersey guys, they got jumped. Not all of them, some of them, but specifically the guy that tried to get at the other guy's girl. And he blames me for setting him up of getting jumped. I want you to put that in perspective, right? And by the way, this is how a lot of weird conspiracy theories come about. If you really want to put it to some real honest terms, right? For example, a lot of people make conspiracy theories about Tupac's murder. Oh, P. Diddy had something to do with it. P. Diddy did this. P. Diddy set it up. But could it just be as simple as understanding action and then there's a course of reaction? In other words, Orlando Anderson gets jumped by Tupac and the death row entourage. And as a reaction, he loads up with the Southside Crips of Compton to go after Tupac at a traffic light in Las Vegas in the 90s when there were no cameras around to record anything. That's not a conspiracy. Just like this gentleman right here, he was literally jumped because he was trying to talk to somebody's girl. And by the way, this guy's girl and this guy, I didn't even know them. I only knew their buddy in South Jersey. So I want you to put that in perspective. He took no accountability that he tried to get at somebody's girl and yet blames me because, let's just be honest about this. In his subconscious heart, he said to himself, I did something wrong to this guy. At some point, he's going to go and get me back. But no, it had nothing to do with that. I never even thought about doing that whatsoever. Never had a thought in my mind that I was going to get him jumped. But he did. He got jumped. And we have the consequences and reason as to why. Because he went out and tried to violate someone. And in the process, he's the one who got violated. And sometimes life is just really as simple as that. You mess around and you find out. Obviously, the original phrase of that has a curse word and it probably sounds better than me saying it, but that's really what it is. You mess around and you find out. So those are some New Jersey street fighting stories that I have. I'll tell you a couple of more and then we'll get into the fights. Middle school, I got into it with this kid named Giovanni, right? I can mention names because guess what? By the way, this guy is unalived. Okay, he's no longer living with us. He's gone from the face of the earth. So I can talk about it. This is okay. Now, the guys that were involved on his side, I'm not going to mention anything, but I will mention ethnicities and this and that, but that's a generalization, not really a specific person. Okay, so Giovanni, rest in peace or rest in pieces, however you want to say it. This was a kid that I got into a street fight with in middle school. One of those normal things like, oh, you got a problem? All right, see me after school. I saw him after school. I went and swung at him, pushed him up against the wall, and then, before you know it, started pummeling on him, right? I was obviously just a little bit bigger than him, more athletic, even in my middle school age. Okay, so Giovanni, guess what happened? he went out and had a group of his friends. Okay, let me just be specific. They were black dudes. Not that that mattered, because obviously I had my own black faction in New Jersey, just like I would out here in California. But again, it's not about the race. Let's just put it like this. He's an Italian kid who had black friends, and he used them against me as a result. So here's what happened. Afterwards, they jumped me, and I got to be honest with you. As worse as this was, getting jumped by like 6 or 5 people, it actually gave me a bit of some status going into high school, because obviously that was 8th grade that this happened. So as a result, going into high school, now everybody knew me as that guy that was the scrapper guy, the guy that had a lot of balls that would go out there and fight 6 people. And look, here's the context of that story. There was one guy that was with me. He was supposed to be my buddy. Again, I'm not going to mention his name either, because if I did, he'll probably sue me. But I mean, look, it was one of those situations where he just literally sat there and watched and did nothing about it. A part of that was cowardice. Now, look, I'm going to jump into another jumping street fight story to this, right? That sort of adds to this particular story. But at one point, what is it that you can really do if a whole group of guys are jumping you, right? Which leads me to this next street fight story that I'm about to get to. And by the way, one that I'm not involved in. Okay, so right after high school, okay, so I knew a group of these Marines, right? We were at a party. One of them was a white boy, but he was gang affiliated with a group of these black dudes, right? He was also a Marine. There was another guy with us. He was also a Marine. He was the one that got jumped. He got jumped by that very same Marine that was gang affiliated with these black dudes. And by the way, all the Marines in his story were white. So just keep this in perspective, okay? The guy that got jumped, he got jumped because prior to that, we were driving around sort of trying to rendezvous our way around the parties in, where was this? I believe it was in New Brunswick. So it was right around the Rutgers University area that this had happened. Okay, so McManus is a Marine, and the other, oh, snap. Did I just mention his name? Okay. Oops. All right. So whatever. That guy got jumped by the other Marine and his friends, but he wasn't involved. I wasn't involved in the jumping whatsoever. So he got jumped because he was just being rude with everybody when we were talking about directions, right? We're like, okay, where are we going to go? Are we going to go here? Are we going to go there? He got impatient because he was one of the drivers as we were sort of rendezvousing around a convoy of different people, right? So we were just basically rolling around guys that were off-duty Marines and a whole bunch of New Jersey gang members with us, right? Just mobbing around. But this one Marine, I mean, obviously he was being rude and obnoxious because nobody was giving him a straight answer. And you know how it is. People are trying to rendezvous around. Yeah, let's go here. Let's go there. And this was in an area in New Brunswick where Rutgers University is present. So there's a lot of different parties that people are trying to decipher where they're going to go to, right? So what happens? In the middle of a parking lot, that one Marine gets jumped. Right. And so I say to the guy that knew these black dudes that were jumping that Marine, I said, dude, what are we going to do? They're like, Kai, listen, don't do anything. These are my homeboys. You know, they're doing this because this guy was just being out of line. He was doing this and he was saying all that. He was being rude. So whoop-de-woo, he got jumped and here we are. So again, he gets jumped. He starts asking questions. Once again, we're now in the middle of being accused of setting up the jumping. And by the way, the guy who got jumped wasn't even accusing us of orchestrating that whole entire jumping, right? He's not accusing us. It was actually his family members. But again, they just try to put 2 and 2 together, and that was that. Now, look, are we responsible for this guy getting jumped because we knew the people that were doing it to him, yes, I would say that there's a certain bear of responsibility that we take from that. But at the same time, can we control these people that went and jumped him? Can we control the people that jumped this Marine that was with us during the party? No, we can't control what they do. But at the same time, it was a very strange situation because I just had to sit there and ponder, should I go fight my friends or should I go fight this Marine that's getting jumped, or should I listen to this other Marine who's friends with these gang members that's allowing this jumping to go on? But again, that's one New Jersey fight story that I can give you. Here's another one. Here's another fight story that I'm going to tell you guys before I go into the UFC 302 main card catalog and everything, right? And the reason why I'm telling you New Jersey fight stories is because obviously this fight card is going to take place in New Jersey, a place that I grew up at. And I want to give you guys context on the areas where the UFC is going to be holding their events. Because what channel does that? What channel talks about the place that the event is taking place in? Not many channels, but I'm going to do that. The reason why I want to do that is because I love traveling. I love going to different parts of the United States. I love going to different parts of Europe, different parts of South America. I love traveling, period. So it sort of gives you a little bit of that traveler's digest into understanding the context. So here it is. Fight story, high school. There was one time in high school where I got into a fight with the same guy in the same day. We fought twice in the same day. I don't want to mention his name because obviously he is a private person now. In fact, that guy went on to join the military. Many of us that grew up in the New Jersey area, a lot of us went into the military, right? Because it's just, let's just be honest, right? New Jersey is a little bit of a conservative area. And then the ones that joined the military that are from the West Coast, the Marines, the Army, the Navy guys that join, a lot of them, well, they join because it's just a great economic opportunity. So, yes, that's where that guy is at right now. So shout out to him. So let's give him a name. No, that's way too real for his. Okay, let's John Doe again. Okay, obviously John Doe was the guy that got jumped earlier, but this is another John Doe because I don't want to mention any names. So this guy that I fought twice in the same day, we got into it because his girlfriend at the time was a mouthy little bird of a thing. Okay, like, I mean, just an absolute trash talker. So guess what I did? I gave it right back to her, right? So little did I know, he comes up at me at a hallway, shoves me in the back of my shoulder, and then I turn around and I said, man, what's up? Why did you do that? He said, well, I'm not going to come at you all sweet or whatever, why did you say this and that to my girl and this and that? And I'm like, well, because your girl is a disrespectful little biatch. So the next day, guess what he does? He goes and he ambushes me in the locker room, sideswipes me, and I got to be honest, in the locker room, he got the best of me because it was unexpected, and then he ran away and this and that. So in between the class periods, I then go on to sit in my computer class, right? Because there are classes for computers, right? How to work computers and whatnot. But I mean, really, it was just a class of extracurricular activities that really have no relevance to really learning any computer skills. Nonetheless, I tell the teacher, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Guess where I went instead of the bathroom? I went straight into the cafeteria where he was at, and we fought right there for the second time in one day. So what happened in that fight? Well, I went and tried to clinch him up, take him down on the table, and then as he took me down on the table, I believe I was on the bottom, and he tried to punch me and missed, and this is what broke his arm, right? Because he obviously tried to punch, and then the punch landed right on the table, so it broke his arm. Nonetheless, we both got suspended, and then a couple of years later, we ended up seeing each other not that far from where we lived. He actually lived down the street from me, as one day I was going for a run. So I saw him, stop by, saw him outside of his garage. We chopped it up, and we've been cool ever since. Because guess what? That fight was literally over a chick, even though it wasn't anybody that I was involved with. It was somebody that I got into a spat with, and so he wanted to defend her honor. And what's weird about that, you got to look at a lot of the statistics that go into gang violence, right? Unfortunately, many of them, believe it or not, are predicated on the idea of somebody fighting over a girl, whether one girl got disrespected or whether one girl was with one guy or the other. Whatever it is, it's always a girl involved in some kind of capacity to where somebody wants blood and vengeance. And that's the unfortunate thing about it. So that right there concludes my New Jersey fight stories that I wanted to tell you guys about. Obviously, there's probably more that I can give you guys, but I didn't want to make this about myself. I just wanted to kind of give this a different segment than what other content creators would do on the MMA side. So with that, let's go on to analyze the entire card for this particular event, because obviously we went over extensive details on the matter of Dustin Poirier and Islam Makhachev. But now let's take a look at the other cards that are involved. Usually, I got to be honest with you, right? Every time somebody makes a transition of any kind, whenever, let's say, they're transitioning from one conversation to the next, usually it's sort of like a downer, right? Because it's like, oh man, now he's done with that subject. Now he wants to move on to the other one. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. When you're watching like the mainstream MMA channels or this and that, you're probably thinking, okay, you read one part of a title that intrigues you, and then that person stops talking about it and goes on to the next subject. I'm here to tell you guys, I'm not done talking about any of these subjects. I'm going to jump back and forth, right? But before I do, because we're going to go on and talk about the next matchup, which, by the way, is Costa versus Sean Strickland, I'm going to play you guys a video. Probably one of my most popular videos that I have in this particular channel regarding Sean Strickland. This was right after he beat Izzy. I'm going to play you this video, and I'm going to explain to you the context of it right after. Israel Adesanya just literally cost the UFC a whole lot of money. Now, I want you to imagine a world where you're Dana White and you literally now have to explain to the shareholders of the UFC that one of your biggest stars in the world, Israel Adesanya, a guy who has swagger, a guy who can dance, a guy who understands the hip-hop American culture and comes from a very exotic place like New Zealand, but has a Nigerian background. All these cultural mashing that you can add into the repertoire of Israel Adesanya's marketing. All of that now gone with having a champion that is a Nazi. Okay? Now, I know that sounds harsh to say. I understand that Sean Strickland has redeemed himself from his old ways, came up with having black training partners, other minorities that train with him and help him in his preparation for his up-and-coming matchups leading all the way to the championships. I understand that's not fully the case. The problem is Sean Strickland still says a lot of racially inflammatory things that, let's just be honest, a lot of right-wing working class white guys can relate to. Let's just call it what it is. And the problem is, when you have a company like Disney, that is a serious problem to deal with as a company. So now, what do? Because Israel Adesanya came into this fight expecting a tune-up. The executives of Disney, the UFC, Zuffa, the Endeavor Management Group in LA that is affiliated and owns the UFC, they were all expecting a tune-up fight in Sean Strickland. That's not what they got. What they got was a very horrible stylistic matchup, which, by the way, is a reality in mixed martial arts on any given day. On any given day, anybody can beat anyone around the world and in any gym. In any gym around the world where there's sparring going on, there's championship level guys that are getting beat, and then there's guys that are current world champions getting their hands put on by somebody who is lesser than them in the rankings, and they are world champion, getting their butts whooped, with the likes of Mike Tyson mentioning this. And by the way, this is the reason why Vince McMahon said that he never wanted to buy or somehow invest in mixed martial arts when he had the chance to do it. And the reason why is because you cannot build stars in mixed martial arts. And primarily, that is the reason why a lot of guys have these problems with fighter pay. Because the reality is that it's not that the company doesn't want to pay you any more money or anything like that. The reality of the situation is that the company just can't afford it or justify the salary that they're going to give you with your lack of contribution to the sales or the pay-per-views or the merchandising that deals with the company. So that is their justification behind all that. And unfortunately, sometimes they can be right about that. So that's the unfortunate thing about fighter pay that you have to understand. So now, Sean Strickland is the world champion. Is he a popular champion? Well, to be honest with you, I think he's very popular among the hardcore MMA community. And I think that alone projects a different level of view as opposed to what is in the outside world, the mainstream world. Because I always emphasize and tell you guys, what you have and what you got going on in the MMA world will not always translate directly into the mainstream world. So just because, let's say, a group of people support Sean Strickland, it doesn't mean that he's going to make Conor McGregor numbers. Israel Adesanya already has been proven to be a star over and over again. And then there were times where, let's say, he didn't have the highest pay-per-view numbers. It tanked because maybe he didn't have the right opponent. Maybe he didn't have the right promotion leading up into the fight, or just the right amount of hype or interest that he created leading up to those particular fights. But nonetheless, he is still a star. And on top of that, the way that Sean Strickland describes him in the Nelk Boys podcast is that he somehow fits a certain agenda. So how symbolic that he goes into this fight, wins against a guy that has these contrasting values that he does. Look at Izzy. He's got his nails painted. He wears pearls and he's a male. He does a lot of things that are quintessentially contrasting to the ideas of, let's say, traditional masculinity. And then here comes Sean Strickland, who fills all those roles in his current moment of time and in his current stage of, let's say, his persona that he has, right? In comparison to, let's say, his past persona as a former neo-Nazi of a Los Angeles skinhead gang member, right? All these things are bad news. So even though he's not really a Nazi, that's not the view of the world that is around him. That is not the view of, let's say, the average fans. They just hear that one time and they're going to run with it. And then on top of that, this is not something that Sean vehemently denies by any stretch of the imagination. You got guys out there that are former gang members, guys that have been part of terrorist organizations, people that have done horrible things, crimes against humanity, whether they were part of a government, a gang, or a rebel group, or any of that sort. A lot of these people, they will deny that they are part of any of these groups. You ask Sean Strickland straight up, he'll tell you, yup, I'm part of that. I was this guy. But because of that, it was because of this redemption story that I rose above it. I started hanging out with more minorities. I started becoming more of a diverse kind of guy. I started having different friends, so on and so forth. Now I'm the new Sean Strickland. This is my new persona, or this and that. Yes, this is all true. This is all a reality of what Sean Strickland has going on. But what he also has going on, unfortunately, are these other things that haunt his past. And this is the reason why the UFC and Dana White did not want him to win. They looked at it as a tune-up fight. Because let's face it, what was the big fight in the horizon? Do you guys remember the summer of 2023? One of the greatest summers of mixed martial arts, and probably even one of the best summers of my life. And part of that was because of the mixed martial arts that had gone on. And then the other experience that I've had traveling up and down California multiple times within a span of a month. But neither here or there. The point of the matter is, during that time of summer of 2023, you had UFC 290. Dricus du Plessis does what? He commits a serious upset in the same similar fashion that you get an upset with the likes of, right now, Sean Strickland taking on Israel Adesanya, defeating him. 5-round decision. Okay? Nobody expected that, just like Dricus du Plessis. So then he wins. They have this storyline going on with Israel Adesanya about who is the real African. And then, of course, it's tied into the South African apartheid history, and being that Dricus du Plessis is the ancestral inheritance of the people that may have colonized that land. Here he is. Israel Adesanya goes up in the octagon after his win, calls him the N-word multiple times, and then Dricus du Plessis only replies with, yeah, I may be African, but you're not my brother, and this and that. It was great. It was an absolute masterpiece of promotion that's supposed to lead to the next fight. You could have led it all the way to, let's say, November, right? And then it never had happened. So because of that, now Israel wanted to continue on his active streak that he had going on. He's a very active fighter, right? Constantly fighting month after month and year after year. Of course, he's had 80 to 90 kickboxing fights, over 100, almost 200 some odd combat sports events in his entire career. So he's a very experienced man, just like Sean Strickland is a very experienced man in ways that's not counted. He constantly goes and fights in the gyms. And guess what? He's constantly honed in. He's got his sights literally set up to its battle site, its battle zone, and its sense of alertness is constantly there. So he's just ready. He was at the right place at the right time, and then Izzy was just way too active and perhaps maybe a little too tired from all these training camps that he had done. Maybe he had stretched himself out a little bit too thin. But nonetheless, one of the things that I have to really tell you in this video, and that I have to emphasize, is really the UFC and its investors and business partners do not like this. But that's the beauty of combat sports. You can't control it. However, they are still a business. But at the same time, you can't control the results of the competition. Because even though we wanted to live in this main character syndrome world of Israel Adesanya being the hero and then fighting the South African colonizer, just like real mixed martial arts and the results that happen into it, it doesn't work out like that. Just like life, a lot of things don't work out the way that you want them to. You try to negotiate a certain deal, you don't get it. You try and make out a certain amount of let's say, leverage to your side. It doesn't always happen. Maybe you want a little bit more, but then you got a little bit less from the negotiation deal that you had. Maybe you wanted a job that, let's say, described as doing something like this or doing something in the executive level, and then you get hit with, let's say, being an associate of some sort, rather than, let's say, the top dog of the company. Okay, you wanted to be world champion or the gold medalist in the Olympics, but instead you ended up getting the bronze. That's okay. You can use that and catapult yourself into becoming the greatest boxer of all time, which is what Floyd Mayweather did. He lost in the amateurs, but he never lost in the pros, and he learned from that lesson. So that is the reality of combat. Your heroes aren't always going to win. And Sean Strickland, unfortunately, is the biggest anti-hero that I think you could really understand that is existing today in mixed martial arts. Again, I go at it over and over again. He was a former Nazi. He says all these things that are not desirable in the modern feminist world. And yes, those are some aspects that I may agree with on terms of what Sean Strickland views in the world. But in all honesty, I'm going to tell you guys, I don't like Sean Strickland's views on Islam. And if you want me to dissect and explain to you why, here it is. He's mentioned in the Nelk Boys that in Islam, we indoctrinate women into wearing a hijab. And he says that it's BS, that, yeah, it's their choice, it's not, or this and that. Here's the thing that Sean Strickland has to understand. He's looking at a world from a very deducted view in terms of the way that he only sees fit as to what he believes is morale. Now, the Western morale is be nice to everybody, treat everybody how you want to be treated. Yes, the golden rule. But then with Islam, there's certain things that are a little more complicated than that. For example, yes, there's a lot of things that we don't believe in, such as free mixing. Okay, we understand that in modern society, there are men and women that work side by side in all different professions. That's fine. But it doesn't mean that we have to choose to be in these types of careers that is not in line with our religion. And we have the choice to do that. But the problem is, with somebody like Sean Strickland, the way that he grew up, and even DC mentions it, no one ever loved this guy until he was in a gym full of guys that shared a certain brotherhood. And then after that, he became this guy that understood the world from a bigger spectrum point of view, coming from a Southern California neo-Nazi into a guy that literally believes in brotherhood amongst men in combat, a universal theme that we as men, no matter what race, religion, creed, or ethnicity, can relate to. But his views on Islam, I'm going to challenge it right now. I think they're completely wrong. I think that there are women in Islam that choose to wear the hijab based on their fear of God. And here's the thing. I don't know if Sean Strickland believes in any religion or any type of organized way of thinking or anything like that. But I can tell you from an Islamic perspective, I truly believe that perhaps maybe, again, my opinion, Allah knows best. But from an Islamic perspective, I believe that Allah gave a blessing to Sean Strickland. And why is that? Well, because of the fact that this guy came up in a very troubled youth. By the way, no children ever deserve to be abused. No children ever deserve to be exposed to pornography in the way that his dad exposed him at 13 or 14 years old. No kid deserves that. And then another thing, no kid chooses to be who their parents are. And with all these hardships that you go through, at some point, you have to get your break. And this is one of the things that you can really appreciate with Sean Strickland. But back to the main point at hand, the UFC does not want him to be champion because it is bad for their brand. It doesn't coincide with the inclusive access of mentality that, let's say, these left-wing liberal companies want to show to the world. Imagine showing Sean Strickland as your world champion. Imagine that. What is that like for a company that is affiliated with Disney, Endeavor, and all these other Hollywood agents that are within this woke culture that is going on right now. And look, I'm not here to criticize any political point of view. Obviously, you guys know where I stand in terms of Islamic values. That's where I stand with that. But when it comes to the right-wing, left-wing dilemma of America, I mean, I'd have to say that I have a very neutral opinions on those things. And surprisingly, Sean Strickland himself is in a situation where he's basically the same type of guy. He's a libertarian. He doesn't believe in right or left. And I've mentioned this in the last video about Sean Strickland being a working class hero. Okay, he's not a Trump guy. He doesn't believe Trump is a real conservative. He believes that Trump is only a conservative based on the fact that he wants to appease to a voter base that thinks a certain way. And he's right. So I agree with him on that. So there's a lot of things that I agree with Sean Strickland, and then there's things that I don't. Because Sean Strickland also complains about the feminized domination of Western society against men, yet Islam somehow is not an answer for him in any kind of degree. I mean, the guy is very confused, but you also have to understand Sean Strickland has very loose morals, to which, yes, he says that he believes in American values and this and that, but in all honesty, I got to be honest with you guys. National values only have a certain limit that only religion can fulfill the void of. And you got to understand that. Because if you don't, then you're only missing a lot of pieces in understanding true morality beyond this world, beyond the comprehension of just borders and languages. But when it comes to the overall universal theme that we can agree with Sean Strickland, and this is only talking for the hardcore fans, because the mainstream normie world, they're not going to accept Sean Strickland no matter how good he is. And from a tactician point of view, we really admire what he was able to do against a decorated striker like Izzy. So that hardcore side of us can appreciate him. But the liberal, casual fans, the normies, as I mentioned, will just never understand it. They will never understand the value of his story and the true value of redemption. Because we live in a superficial world where we choose not to believe that anybody is capable of change. But they are. And you know what, guys, I got to tell you, this is one of the most beautiful things that I love about combat sports. Everybody out there has their own different style in how they're going to present MMA. We all talk about the same things, but we all have a different way of going about it. If you're a gambler, well, all you're going to want to hear are the predictions and how the fight is going to play out. And fair play, you want to know who the winners are? I can do that too, but it's not my specialty. My specialty, other than, of course, understanding the tactics of the game and then being able to give you a proper prediction on that, is storytelling, public relations, and then on top of that, being able to relate to the public of what is going on within the insides of the sport, in the insides of what is really going on in the mind of these fighters and the real people that are surrounding these athletes in times of when they're, let's say, dealing with their doctors, dealing with nutritionists, and even USADA agents that are knocking at their door at 5 a.m. in the morning to collect their piss. This is the reality of combat sports that people don't see outside of it. So why is the UFC so threatened by Sean Strickland being champion? Because the majority of the world will never understand anything outside of the superficial value of the fact that he was neo-Nazi, and the fact that he says these things about women, and the fact that he says these things about immigration, and the fact that he says these things about Muslims. It's just never going to fly. And that is why the UFC is going to work night and day to try to topple him while he is the champion and the undisputed champion of the world right now. But only Allah knows best. Sorry about that. Let me get my mic right back up there so that I can. Okay, there it is. The mic is right back. So, the reason why I had played that video for you guys, I wanted to give you context on where the UFC is at with Sean Strickland right now. Obviously, there was a lot of contract uphill battles that Sean Strickland team had to deal with the UFC. Why? He wanted a rematch and he didn't get the rematch simply because the UFC does not find him marketable. So now on to the kicks and punches of Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a full card prediction on this whole entire card. And I'm also going to do a full card prediction for the 5-on-5 Queensberry versus Matchroom Sports prediction. Be on the lookout for that during this week. Okay, I'm going to drop videos on that separately. One for the boxing, the 5-on-5, and one for the UFC. But right now, what I can tell you is that I see this matchup going to a decision. And let me tell you why. Does Paulo Costa have knockout power? Yes, he does. Does Sean Strickland have knockout power? Sometimes, not all the time, but most times he doesn't. So this fight is going to a decision. Now, who's going to get the decision on this one? I would not be surprised if it's Sean Strickland. All he has to do is get away from Paulo Costa, and not only get away from Paulo Costa, just dodge his punches and also put himself in positions where he can punch and hit him with jabs in the comfortable distance that Sean Strickland usually fights at. He's going to throw some low kicks. Paulo Costa is going to attempt some high kicks. I may even see Sean Strickland get rocked with a head kick sometime in this fight. But ultimately, this is a 3-round fight, so I see this fight in favor of Sean Strickland to win by decision. And then Jailton Almeida jumps right back up against Alexander Romanov. He's in there too. Cesar Almeida taking on Roman Kopylov. So a great middleweight 2-for-2 right here. Randy Brown taking on Elise Dos Santos, which is going to be the card opener. Let's take a look at the rest of the card for UFC. Obviously, I'm not doing the prediction right now. I'm doing a separate video on that. But what I will do is look at the rest of the cards right here just to kind of review them, see who's in there. Look at this. How about this? Kevin Holland is in there as well. He's in there. Okay, obviously that's not added into, that must have been an old poster, okay, because we got Kevin Holland right here against Mikhail Olenchuk. I'm very bad with pronouncing his name, but you would imagine a lot of people are bad at pronouncing my name as well. So I'm kind of glad that this fight is in the card. It's just added more flair to that particular card. Randy Brown taking on the 37-year-old Dos Santos. Let's take a look at the early prelims. Start from the very beginning. Andre Lima. Okay, undefeated flyweight. That's going to be a fun fight. Okay. Let's see. Alan Perez, Jocelyn Edwards. Bantamweight fight. How about this? New Jersey's own Mickey Gall. For those of you that don't know, obviously Mickey Gall was CM Punk's debut fight. Dana White saw him at one of these shows that he does. Dana White's looking for a fight where he recruits people. And then all of a sudden, he decided, you know what, Mickey Gall, if he wins this one, he fights CM Punk, and the rest is history. So what else do we have here? preliminary cards. Philip Rowe. How about that? Okay. Against Jake Matthews. Grant Dawson against Joe Selesky. Cesar Almeida, Roman Kapilov. Okay, so they demoted that card and put Kevin Holland up there. Okay, that makes sense. Nico Price versus Alex Morono. All right, we got ourselves a pretty good card here. Okay, so now let's go to... I'm going to go to Topology. I'm going to take a look at, because guess what? Even though this is an MMA website, this is going to cover a boxing card as well with the 5-on-5. Which, unfortunately, this fight was supposed to have Bivol against Arthur Beterbiev, and that is not happening because I believe that Arthur Beterbiev is injured. So instead, this is the card that we have in front of us right now. Saturday, same day as the UFC card. So this is great. You get to see this in the afternoon. By the way, what time is the UFC fight? Let me mark this down right here real quick. So let's see. 3 hours, 22. Okay, there we go. We got a timestamp on that one. 3 hours and 22 minutes. We are here to discuss Queensberry versus Matchroom. So Deontay Wilder has now been promoted to main event because obviously this was supposed to take place with the Undisputed Championship for Arthur Beterbiev and Bivol. That would have been great. Another unification of a belt, but we're not getting that one here. So Deontay Wilder taking on Zhilei Zhang. I saw True Jordy make a video about this. He's saying, is this the end of Deontay Wilder? Is Zhang the guy to end Deontay Wilder? I tell you what, if this was any other time era in boxing, I don't know if Deontay Wilder is fighting Weili Zhang. I'm sorry, Weili Zhang. That's the MMA fighter. I'm not sure if he's fighting Zhilei Zhang by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to be honest with you. It's a bad matchup. Not only that, it's not in his favor. Not only is it not in his favor, this is literally a legend killer match. Okay, meaning that this could be the matchup that really puts him out of his misery. And we've seen a lot of that in MMA, right? Where a guy is going through a losing streak, kind of like BJ Penn, Tony Ferguson, and all of a sudden they run across somebody like Paddy Pimblett. Well, okay, Paddy Pimblett didn't really beat him too bad. I'm talking about Tony Ferguson, but Michael Chandler certainly did. That devastating kick that he put on Tony Ferguson just added even more CTE to his brain. Wilder's coming off of a loss, but not really that horrific, right? He didn't get knocked out. He got outpointed. Again, he can't play these hesitancy games against Weili Zhang, right? This is a knockout artist as well. Now, I believe he's a little bit slower than Deontay Wilder, but that could also mean that he hits way harder than him. So what is this we have in replacement of Dimitri Bivol? How about this Malik Zinad, 22-0 versus 22-0 Dimitri Bivol? This is going to be fun looking up this guy, taking a look at tapes of him, analyzing what is it that he does, and putting this entire prediction together, right? Along with the UFC card that I'm going to do as well. Filip Hrgović takes on Daniel Dubois. Now, Daniel Dubois made a great account of himself taking on Alexander Usyk, who we now have found out is the best heavyweight in the world. But what does that say about Daniel Dubois and his performance against him? Now, obviously, very controversial in the way that it ended. But he has a really good chance with this guy. All these fights are 50-50. Deontay Wilder is a 50-50 fight. Dimitri Bivol versus Malik Zinad, maybe not a 50-50 fight, but we don't know much about this guy. It is intriguing. He is 22-0. We'll see where this goes. Ray Ford versus Nick Ball, 2 undefeated guys, literally almost the same record. Okay, 1 draw in each, both undefeated. And then you have Hamza Shiraz. How about this? Our very own homeboy Zane, who is always with Hamza Shiraz, always covering his fights, been in his fights as a media team and whatnot. So how about this? Willie Hutchinson takes on Craig Richards. That's a good fight. Very underrated guy. So, all right, that's the 5-on-5 that we have. Is that 5-on-5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so Willie Hutchinson is just the preliminary card, sort of say. So that's what we got going on with Matchroom and the UFC. Be on the lookout for the prediction that I'm going to do. Obviously, this video was not meant to do a prediction or anything like that. I'm going to drop that on the video. This is just more of live streaming and addressing certain issues with certain people. On top of that, covering all the different news that is going on in the world of mixed martial arts, boxing, and everything in between. So, obviously, last night, before we go, let's just cap it off with this, right? Maybe I could go on for, how long have I been on now? I've been on now for 3 hours or so, 3 hours and 30 minutes, right? 3 hours and 27 minutes right now. So, yeah, I think we can run this up, just talk about the Paige Van Zant fight yesterday and also the Josh Taylor and the Jack Catterall fight, which, by the way, Jack Catterall ended up winning by a very close split decision. So let's recap this and put a time stamp on this real quick. All right. So in under 60 seconds, we're going to recap all the fights that have gone on with Paige Van Zant, Jack Catterall, and Josh Taylor. And I believe there was a bare knuckle FC card as well. We're going to win. I didn't watch the fight, but for the sake of it, let's take a look at the results of that fight. Obviously, I'm not going to know a lot of the names that are in it. Hold on. Let's see here. BKFC. So this was a card in Mexico last night. This particular card right here. Okay. So we're just going to go over these fights and then, yeah, we'll call it a day because I think we've been here quite long enough. So if you guys have been tapping in for this amount of time, don't forget to like and subscribe as we cover all the major combat sports events around the world. So let's see here. Luis Ray Gilagos against Rodolfo Riebo. Let's see here. What was there any results in this fight? Let me see. Because this was last night. So, okay. Okay, basically these were the guys that were in the fights yesterday. So I didn't watch it. If you guys watched it, write on the comments below what you guys thought of the fight. But I did watch Paige Van Zant and this girl Elle that she was supposed to fight. So this is Paige Van Zant's boxing debut. Okay, let me give you guys a little bit of some technical breakdown of this fight and what I saw. What I saw was an over frantic MMA fighter who didn't know how to sit down on your shots, which, by the way, is perfectly okay, right? Because obviously in the boxing style of things, especially with Prince Nassim, there's nothing wrong with constantly darting in and out. right? Just doing what you do with the Dominic Cruz style, the TJ Dillashaw style, the Cody Garbrandt style, the Tyson Fury style. You know what I'm talking about, that real funky movement type of style, right? I think there's benefits to doing that in MMA and then trying to do that in boxing, but there's just a different way of doing it, right? Again, a lot of boxing is really about timing, okay? And not so much about aggression or athleticism. Now, athleticism and sometimes aggression helps in boxing, but not all the time. And I just think that's where Paige Van Zant really looked like an amateur last night, was not understanding the difference of, let's say, distance control, or the management of, let's say, being able to have a counter shot idea, right? She didn't have an idea of how to counter shot. She got hit a lot. She didn't know when to put her hands down or put her hands up, because here's the thing. A lot of conventional boxing coaches will always tell you, hey, put your hands up, put your hands up, right? But the thing is, does it always work? And the thing is, there's positivity to not putting your hands up, right? For example, they don't see the shots coming if you're fighting with your hands down. If you're a fast fighter, you can get away with it, but you also have to have the right foot placement. In other words, you have to have the right distance of putting your hands down and then being able to dart back and forth and being ready to put your hands up when you get close range. So she didn't have any of that. She got knocked down a few times too. So it kind of shows that, like, wow, you know, this is the vulnerability of her openings in terms of the holes in her game, especially in boxing, a sport that she's never done before, and doing it in a way that is sort of MMA centric, but not really conducive to the conventional aspects of boxing, which constantly lended her to her mistake. And again, getting knocked down a couple of times, I think the draw is fair. I would argue as to say that Elle had won it, but hey, I'm not mad at the decision of being a split decision. Now, how about Josh Taylor and Jack Catterall? Obviously, the first time these guys fought, controversially, many people thought that Josh Taylor lost that fight. Well, if you saw this fight the second time around, I got to be honest with you. Number one, I was not very impressed with the crowd. I don't know what's up with that. But again, it wasn't like Josh Taylor was this ticket seller that we've known him to be. He's just not that kind of guy. But I guess that's the kind of event that we got. But back to the boxing at hand. He was getting picked apart, was getting hit in ways that I've never seen anyone do to Josh Taylor. And he got exposed. Great fight, a classic. And again, very underrated for a lot of people who have not seen it, unfortunately. Now, what's next for Josh Taylor? I got to tell you, this sort of brings me to the last segment of this entire live content. Okay, so what am I going to name this? Because obviously this is regarding Josh Taylor, okay, and Tyson Fury, and all these other guys that have already now taken losses. Okay, so what are we going to name this particular piece? Okay, we're going to call this, let's say, 1 minute from now. Okay, we're going to call this one 3 hours and 36 minutes. Career post losing a fight. Josh Taylor and Tyson Fury. Okay. So, next segment, in 30 seconds, we're going to talk about the career of fighters after losing a fight, and in particular, Josh Taylor and Tyson Fury. Now, it's really important that I talk about this because for a long time, we sort of looked at Josh Taylor as somebody that was the savior of this division after Terrence Crawford had left. Tyson Fury, on the other hand, well, we have this imaginary fairy tale that we have of him that, quite frankly, just doesn't exist in combat sports. So here we are, 3 hours and 36 minutes into the live stream. We're going to talk about what happens to an illustrious career of Josh Taylor and Tyson Fury after taking a loss like this. Well, to be quite honest with you, I don't think it should change them to any degree. And I'm going to speak on it from an MMA mentality point of view, to where we got guys like Robbie Lawler, who had double-digit losses when he became a champion, and Jorge Masvidal, who became a star after having double-digit losses and becoming a number one contender after becoming a journeyman, as what Colby Covington would often refer to him as, Journeyman George. Now, one loss in Josh Taylor, one loss in Tyson Fury, does that really define everything? Because guess what? Anthony Joshua has now lost 3 times, and one of them he did not avenge. One of them he now has a chance of doing so based on his placement to where he's at in his career. So literally, Anthony Joshua is just one win away from redeeming himself into one of the greatest fighters of all time in just beating Alexander Usyk. He already has the resume. He's already beaten Andy Ruiz after Andy Ruiz beat him. All he has to do now is beat Alexander Usyk. That's if they even have a realm of possibility of making that matchup happen, which, by the way, not really that far-fetched, considering the fact that, hey, guess what? We live in an era where all these fights can be made. So just like that, one fight away, Anthony Joshua is back on top. Same thing with Tyson Fury. He lost, okay, second time around, just like the Rocky and Clubber Lang story. He could jump right back in there and beat Alexander Usyk and then still become the greatest of all time, at least in this generation, and then has a chance to fight Anthony Joshua. Well, what if Anthony Joshua does end up beating Alexander Usyk? The particular trajectory that Anthony Joshua is at right now, even though he's lost to him twice, it's really not that far-fetched to believe that he has a great possibility of defeating Alexander Usyk. And if he does, well, it does a lot of great things for his career and the trajectory that he is currently experiencing, right? There's a lot of redemption stories that can come out of this. Now, what about Josh Taylor? Really, I've thought for a long time that he was the next savior of the 140 division. Now he's no longer undisputed champion. Unfortunately for Jack Catterall, he didn't win the undisputed championship because Josh Taylor was no longer an undisputed champion, even though he never really lost those belts in the first place. But I believe he had won an IBF belt or some sort of WBA belt as a result of this fight. Either way, I'm not here to talk about whether he should be undisputed or not. I have a separate video on that. But what I am here to talk about is the redemption that he can get out of it. And I think boxing fans are going to slowly learn that none of their favorite fighters are going to stay undefeated. And if they do, well, by goodness, they actually deserve it. Khabib is undefeated, and a lot of people will argue and say, well, he left too early. Well, that's the name of the game. You leave before it's too late, because if you don't leave before it's too late, eventually somebody's going to beat you. But even if somebody beats you after an illustrious career, you can still argue for the narrative of you getting in there for the bounce back. And that's where Tyson Fury and Josh Taylor are at. You also have to take into consideration the fact that the Saudis are so heavily involved in the world of professional boxing right now. One thing you cannot deny is that they will continue to make these matchups with undefeated versus undefeated, just like the entire stack of cards that we just saw with the 5-on-5 right now. Many of those guys in that card are undefeated. But after these fights, they're not going to be undefeated anymore. So at what point will anybody even stay undefeated if the Saudis are willing to pay the type of money that they have. Let's take a look at the card that we have here with guys that are undefeated. Dimitri Bivol is obviously undefeated. That could have been gone away if he had fought Bivol, but now he has Malik, who is also undefeated. He could get his record taken right here. Filip Hrgović, 17-0 right now. People are saying that he's probably the guy on the come up right now, the dark horse of the heavyweight division in boxing. He's undefeated. But guess what? Against Daniel Dubois, could that be a reality? Could there be an upset? What about Hamza Shiraz taking on Austin Williams? Now, shout out to Zane Musa Boxing. He cut out a particular conversation that we had where I mentioned that Ammo Williams versus Hamza Shiraz reminds me of Lawrence Okoli versus Chamberlain when they were both upcoming prospects. And here we are. Two undefeated guys. And why did they do that at that particular time? Well, a big part of that is because it was in high demand. And I believe the two promotions just felt that it was good money. They had great following behind them, and they were willing to sacrifice either one guy for their record. But that's what I'm saying. The Saudis are paying so much money that eventually everybody at the top level is going to lose their undefeated record. So with that said, what are you going to do? Are you going to stop supporting your favorite fighter because they had lost? Or are you going to continue and support them and see where they're at in the toughest competitions of the world? Because after all, that is what we're here for, right? To see our favorite fighters fight the best guys in the world with no reservations of who it is and what time it will be. Eventually, we're going to have to cave into the idea that, hey, this is the proper course of action in boxing. Not everybody is going to be undefeated, but that's the beautiful part about it, is seeing the comeback and the rise that comes out of it. But once again, hey, only time will tell. Only time will tell of what is going to happen in the near future. But all I'm saying is just because your fighter lost, it doesn't mean you give up on them. You understand? You can't give up on them because you never know what's going to happen. And quite frankly, I think that boxing fans really need to understand the context of American football to boxing. And what do I mean by that? Do you think Tom Brady gets to choose who they play in the championships? Do you think they get to choose who they play every week? No. But that is the reason why there are no teams that have ever been undefeated in any NFL season. And if there has, they've been stopped at their tracks by the end of the Super Bowl because it's just constant, tough competition after another. But we remain respecting our teams, our favorite players, and our favorite organizations, right? So why can't we treat boxers the same way? And I'll tell you why. Because they created a culture of praising the undefeated. As if, well, look, it's just not the same context as other sports, to be quite honest with you. So that's just what it is. So I think that's all that we have for this particular stream right now. I want to thank you for all of those that have been tapping in, all those that have listened to the entire broadcast of this live stream from front to back. Once again, all I can ask for is thank you for your support and your watch time and your shares and likes and subscribes. Do all of that. And I will see you guys in the next content in the next coming days. And don't forget, I'm coming out with a prediction video for the 5-on-5 series, full card prediction on a separate video, and for the UFC in a separate video. And I'm going to drop all of that sometime tomorrow, inshallah. I'll see you guys for the next one.